Reborn. Evolving from Nothing Chapters 151 to 160. Chapter 151 I Accept. Who? The city lord of Fort Sutner stared at his subordinate in surprise and a little displeasure. The man was one of the local city guards, but should know better than to barge into the central castle without proper authorization, unless it was an emergency. He would need to reprimand the castle guards after this. The famed swordmaster Lord Inigo Montoya, sir. The black shade of 7 blades. The guard panted as he caught his breath, his body heaving from exertion. Lord Gabito's eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize the name, but for the warrior to have such a title, it must be someone of importance. Damn it, why are so many irritating figures popping up now? The city lord grumbled under his breath, rubbing his eyes in frustration as he glanced at the 2 wizards from the Church of Light. Damon, he waved his hand off to the side. Immediately, a shade that had been lurking in the background stepped forward. An elderly shade dressed in a long brown robe, covered in silk ropes and markings. His steward that helped him manage the affairs of the city. My lord. Damon bowed, his long white hair shifting slightly. Quickly, put together a reception and invite this Lord Intelgo or Inigo or whatever into the castle and see what he wants. Be respectful about it, though. Lord Gabito waved him off, rubbing his forehead as he turned around back to the wizards from the Church of Light. How long will it take for you 2 to find this vampire and get rid of it? Dorian focused his breathing as he waited in a guest foyer within the guardhouse. The captain of the gate guard was waiting outside, standing at attention. The room was sparsely decorated, with a few wooden tables and chairs. Some swords and other weapons were stacked in the corner, covered in dust. Several minutes had passed since he'd been brought here, terrorizing the guard at the gate with his grand presence. Oh? Dorian muttered as he felt Helena pinch him. He was still holding her carefully, feeling her head rest against his chest. He looked down in surprise, seeing her glare up at him. He had thought she was still asleep, recuperating. I am your wife now? She whispered quietly, still glaring. Her cheeks blushed slightly as she said that, lighting up her still withered appearance. Shish, quiet my lovey-dovey wife. Remember, you're caught up in a magic spell that makes you stay asleep. Dorian simply grinned down at her obnoxiously. Helena's mouth opened to retort, but before she could say anything, the guardhouse door boomed open. She immediately shut her mouth and eyes, giving Dorian one last glare for good measure. Lord Inigo, the guard that the captain of the gate had sent off reappeared, his face flushed from exertion. A delegation has arrived to receive you. Meanwhile, far from Dorian, on an unusual exotic world within the Graal Alliance. A monkey and a man landed atop a giant leaf that came floating down from the sky. The monkey moved smoothly, its movements precise and practiced, while the human jumped clumsily but managed to hold his footing. You must be prepared for anything. Battle on unstable ground, on wavering surfaces. Sun Wukong's voice echoed out as he lashed out at will with a long staff, sweeping him off his feet as he tried to balance on the leaf. Will tumbled backwards, sliding around on the nearly 100 meters long leaf. He managed to flip himself over as he fell, particles of light flowing around him. Light mag, whack. Before he could finish casting a spell, Sun Wukong appeared again right in front of him, knocking him back once more. A bright, warm aura of light covered Will protectively, but failed to stop the attack from the staff. The blow seemed to completely ignore the innate barrier that surrounded Will, knocking him away. Do you think your enemies will wait for you to finish casting a spell? Be faster. Be stronger. Sun Wukong's voice was cool. Be better. Will snorted, manipulating light energy around him without casting a spell as he lashed out at Sun Wukong. The monkey effortlessly dodged the blow, but took a few steps back, just enough for Will to gain his footing. The strange scene that was playing out had been a very different one just a few days prior. Sun Wukong had grabbed Will, rescuing him as the Ascension ruins collapsed. Will's mind had gone blank as they seemed to warp about and teleport, moving at an incredibly quick speed. In what felt like hours but was really only a minute or 2 at most, Will had found himself standing on a grassy world bridge, alone with the monkey that had grabbed him. He'd sat on the ground for a minute, gathering his thoughts. To Will, everything had seemed to happen at 1,000,000 miles an hour, going by so fast. His memories were still vague and scattered. One thing he knew for sure, however. Dorian had saved him, once again. And now this monkey had too. Wow, people really save me a lot, huh? He'd thought at the time, smiling ruefully. The dragon, or whatever it was that Dorian was, that had done so much for him had once more saved his life. Will could recall his memories from before he was resurrected. How he had lived in a small city, blinded by his desire to join up with the inner circle of his family. How Dorian had awoken him to the reality of his situation, to how he was wasting his life pursuing something of little value. How foolish I was. It hadn't been too long since then, yet Will felt as if an eternity had passed. He remembered keenly the inheritance he had received from a kindly old wizard whose soul was on his last legs. A powerful wizard of incredible skill that had lived hundreds of years ago. In his mind now was a store of knowledge about light magic and the Tao of Light, the unique way the wizard talked about the law he studied. It was a law that was almost identical to the law of light, from what Will could understand, but differed in that it was personalized. Instead of a general law, it was a law that harmonized his soul, letting him control it more efficiently and with greater impact. The illustrious elder mage Horhavel had, according to this inheritance, reached the peak of angelic class but failed to ascend. Will later found that his soul had been tremendously enhanced. Part of this seemed to be due to living a state of near death. For some reason, the inheritance in his soul seemed to have interacted with and absorbed some type of foreign energy, enhancing his strength while he lay unconscious in a deathly state. His soul now inhabited a body that was incredible. His form seemed inherently suited to light magic, allowing him to fully adapt to it. Every spell he cast came out perfectly and the energy flowed within him without error. It was as if he had been reborn in a body perfectly suited to his needs, a stroke of fate that was incredibly fortuitous. All thanks to Dorian. The debt he owed that man, it felt insurmountable. Will had shaken his head as he thought that, the gratefulness he felt hard to put into words. It was at that moment, as Will's mind was clearing, catching up to speed, that the monkey had begun to speak. "Greetings, young wizard. My name is Sun Wukong," the monkey said, giving Will a friendly nod. "Thank you for the rescue, warrior. My name is Will Roble." Will had responded, looking back at him. The two had talked for a couple minutes as Sun Wukong explained who he was and what the situation Will had been in was. He also explained what happened to Dorian and Helena, the monkey just barely managing to see them escape through a spatial fracture. As the monkey went on, however, Will only felt himself getting more and more confused. "So you traveled all this way here to rescue me? How would you even know I was here at all?" Will looked at Sun Wukong, not understanding. The monkey rubbed at the large necklace he wore, giving Will a small smile. "I have a special pair of eyes. Some would call them a blessing, while others a curse. My eyes allow me to see through fate itself, for things that relate directly to me." Sun Wukong began, his voice taking on an air of grand power as he spoke. "And deep within your body, hiding away, is something that relates quite closely to me and my future." Sun Wukong's eyes flashed, a remnant of a being that must be destroyed. His voice was cold steel, his eyes black iron. Will shivered as he heard this and saw the monkey stare at him, suddenly feeling incredibly vulnerable. The feeling passed in an instant, however, as the monkey smiled, waving off the gloom. "However, that doesn't relate directly to you, my friend. You, in fact, are in an interesting position indeed." The monkey looked at Will inquisitively. "You are a student of illustrious elder mage Horhavel?" Will paused then, sputtering in surprise. "You know of him?" He stared at the powerful monkey, his eyes wide. Of course. He was an incredibly adept light wizard that founded his own unique school of magic, from his unique understanding of the law of light. "I can recognize a hint of that law and style coming off your soul." Sun Wukong examined Will closely. His death several hundred years ago was an unexplained tragedy. Will clenched his fists as he heard that, remembering how the elder mage had described his death to them. Betrayed by his comrades, left for the dead. Just like Will had been left for the dead, forgotten and ignored by a family he had once thought the world of. His death was indeed a tragedy. Will kept his words to himself, for now, not sharing the elder mage's story. The man's last words still echoed firmly in his mind. "To whoever receives this, know that fate has decided you be the bearer of my death. I am the illustrious elder mage Horhavel, reduced to death's door. After mastering the Tao of Light and reaching the peak of the angelic stage of the soul, I sought to break past the shackles that held me to the 30,000 worlds and achieve godhood. Alas, I have failed. At the last moment, a cadre of sorcerers from my thieving allies, the Golden Kingdom, betrayed me, and struck me down when I was most vulnerable. Despite my deathly injuries, I managed to escape, striking down 2 of their pariah mages in the process and tearing a hole in the void, ending up here. The site of my death lies here, deep within this beast-infested forest. Between 2 shattered mountains, in the darkest pit of this valley, I breathe my last. My treasures are yours for the taking. I only ask that you one day inform Holy Duke Archel, of the Elector Empire, that the Golden Kingdom betrayed me. Thank you. The cycle continues. Will would keep this secret for now. The monkey in front of him had saved his life and seemed to be incredibly powerful, but there was nothing wrong with being careful. One day he would avenge the fallen wizard who had helped give him a new lease on life. But that day was not today. So many debts that I owe. But I will pay them all back. His eyes flashed. One way or another. Sun Wukong looked at the passionate and driven appearance Will had on, his face slightly awkward. Right. So, moving on. Sun Wukong shrugged. You are in an interesting position, Will. That remnant soul you have hidden within you is something that even I cannot destroy. Not unless it is fully reformed. I know of no way to remove it, either. Sun Wukong gestured at Will. Is it dangerous? Can it cause me harm? Will asked in return, concern appearing in his voice as he focused on his soul. Internally, he couldn't feel the presence of that remnant soul. But he knew it was still there, somewhere, lurking. No, not directly, anyway. Your soul is not suited for it, it can do naught but remain in your body, unsatisfied. Wukong shook his head. However, just because it can't hurt you doesn't mean others won't. That remnant is only part of a whole. Many other remnants exist, and the owners of those remnants will be searching for you. Beings that are far more powerful than you can imagine. Sun Wukong paused, glancing at Will. I don't mind helping protect you, but if you go off on your own, you will not only put yourself at risk, but those around you as well. Will clenched his fists even tighter as he heard this. Am I to be a burden forever? Saved over and over, protected by others, forever unable to stand alone? His words bled bitterness in his mind. Will's thoughts were still somewhat a mess. His revival was still fresh in his mind, his soul still adapting to the world around him. That said, it would be better for you to learn how to protect yourself. Will looked up as he heard the monkey speak up, catching his attention. Your soul seems to have firmly rooted itself within the Tao of Light, as the illustrious Horhavel termed it. You should be able to step into the Lord class quite soon with that understanding. If you are willing, I would be happy to help train you. Sun Wukong finished his offer, clasping his hands together. You would do that for me? Will asked, his voice slightly raw. Sun Wukong simply smiled. Why not? I have as much time now as I will ever have. Remember, your fate is intertwined with mine now. These eyes of mine never lie. He tapped just below his eyes, still grinning. Just like that, Will agreed to train under Sun Wukong. The more he got to know the monkey, the more he felt Sun Wukong had nothing but good intentions for him. The duo traveled quite a distance, moving at such a fast speed that Will was unable to comprehend how truly quick they traversed the 30,000 worlds. Sun Wukong seemed to make the world around him warp, so that when he and Will took a single step, it transformed into tens of thousands of meters of movement. In a matter of what felt like hours, they arrived on an entirely different world, very far from Magmoor. A world that was dominated by an enormous, gargantuan tree. A tree that stretched for miles tall, breaching into chaotic space, projecting a force field to block off the dangerous outside air. It was made of some type of thick brown wood, magically enhanced. Then and there, for the next several days, Will directly began to train under Sun Wukong. Be better, huh? Will's mind snapped back to the present as he stabilized himself on the leaf, particles of light energy surrounding him. Whoosh! Will jumped up into the air, leaping towards one of the thousands of large wooden branches that stuck out from the enormous tree they were falling near. Some branches were small, only a meter or two thick and a few dozen meters long, while others stretched for miles, often acting as both roots and branches at the same time. I will be better. Bright white light glowed from Will's sockets as a pair of wings appeared on his back, just as he landed. A powerful aura of light surrounded Will as he soared into the air, brilliant energy flowing around him. The energy in the air fluctuated as Will's understanding of his Tao of light increased, his power enhancing. Excellent progress, young wizard. Focus on the law, enrich yourself and your understanding of it. Sun Wukong shouted encouragement as he jumped off the falling leaf to another branch as well. The leaf floated down nearly 500 meters before it touched the ground, a daunting distance. He smiled, pleased, as he looked up at Will. Good, good, Sun Wukong whispered, a sense of pride filling him. Despite the short amount of time he had spent preparing the wizard, he already felt somewhat attached. He admired the man's straightforwardness and determination. Is this what it is like to have a disciple, great lady? Sun Wukong looked away from Will, up towards the sky as he spoke. A stiff breeze was the only reply he got as Will sank into a state of enlightenment, sitting down to meditate. The monkey sighed quietly. I have come so far, master. I am preparing everything I can. His voice was calm as he spoke, tinged with a hint of sadness. He turned to look at Will briefly. I did not lie. His fate is indeed tied with mine. Sun Wukong's eyes flashed. Because I saved you, the time I can see through fate has extended a little more. Just like with the other anomalies I found. His voice remained calm as he spoke, but underneath, emotion broiled. But it seems I cannot escape this fate entirely. It is still there, the blank spot, a point where I can see through fate no more, despite these eyes of mine that are blessed by the heavens. He continued, everything about me up to that point I can see through, but after that point, nothing. Sun Wukong paused, smiling again. Is that death, wise lady? To see fate, my own end. Such cruelty. A quiet pause ensued. Abruptly, Sun Wukong laughed. But what is life without a bit of suspense, Ha ha ha. If I am to die, then I will die with good cheer. I will greet death with a smile and a ready fist. He shook off the somber mood, turning his attention over towards Will. But before I die and can guard this realm no longer, let us make of you a great wizard, young Will. Perhaps you can bear the mantle that I am destined to fail. Great swordmaster, I have heard of your legendary prowess. As a practitioner of the sword myself, I have always been devout in challenging myself to exchange pointers with my peers. Would you accept my humble challenge? Dorian looked back at the speaker, the city lord of Fort Sudner, his face showing no emotion as he responded. I accept. Chapter 152 Pointers. Dorian locked eyes with the city lord of Fort Sudner, his face not showing a hint of distress or emotion. Just a little while before this, the situation had been vastly different. Dorian was being escorted through the city by a troop of shade guards from the city lord's castle. All the guards wore heavy plated armor and moved with both experience and strength. They were clearly all veterans that had seen actual combat. The weakest among them was at the master class. The strongest, a shade known as Lieutenant Becker, was at the late Grand Master class, a fairly powerful level. The guards had looked at him oddly when they saw him carrying the limp Helena. However, they seemed to take his strange behavior in stride, as if it wasn't unexpected, and led him onward. This was the first time Dorian had ever seen a city that was inhabited entirely by shades. To his disappointment, it was largely similar to cities run by humans. The shades had merchants and guards, urchins and crafters. He saw restaurants and magic shops, training dojos for common mystic martial arts and blacksmith shops. The one thing that did differ, however, was the presence of several churches. Religion in the 30,000 worlds was a diverse topic. Most beings believed in the cycle of reincarnation in the heavens. The most common belief about this centered around the concept that at death, one's soul rose to the heavens and was reborn in a new body. A circle of life and death, repeating over and over, the great cycle. Some believed that one's actions while alive in the 30,000 worlds would determine how soon they were reborn or what form they would be born into. Beliefs like this had the unfortunate side effect of creating a negative stigma around those with disabilities or disfigurements. Apart from the belief in the cycle and the heavens, however, there were a few other widespread religions. One of these was a belief in the light. The light was considered a deity of sorts, but believed to be closer to a force of nature, through which one could find their true purpose in life. The Church of Light had a huge number of believers, but most of them happened to be shades, something Dorian found paradoxical at first, given that shades were something he associated with darkness or shadows. The religion, from what Dorian gleaned, seemed somewhat complicated, but it didn't seem like an offensive or a bad one. Many of its teachings focused around doing the right thing, respecting others, and protecting the weak. All in all, it was a religion Dorian could approve of, not that anyone was asking for his opinion on it. As Dorian moved through the city, however, he noticed a large number of grand edifices, towering buildings constructed of pure white stone that gleamed. He counted at least 7 of the churches as the delegation that had picked him up helped him move through the crowds of shades moving about their business. The Church of Light really is extremely widespread in the Shade commune. Dorian had thought at the time, frowning slightly. I really need to avoid leaking that I beat up and nearly killed their holy prince. In terms of strength, Dorian was unsure how powerful he was. However, he had grown enough that he considered himself one of the strong now. He had managed to almost defeat the Holy Prince, a genuine powerful expert, in his previous form, before he gained the laws of greed and mercy, as well as his balanced demon form. The Holy Prince Isaac wasn't the strongest expert in the Shade commune. In fact, he didn't even make it into the top 10. But he was definitely in the top 30. Though, raw power isn't everything. I can still get tired easily. If I have to face a huge number of foes, I will definitely lose. Dorian nodded his head sharply at the thought. He was deep in enemy territory. It would be best to avoid revealing his true nature. But as for Inigo Montoya's, the black shade of 7 blades, true nature. He smiled. Well now, that is another matter entirely. Such a lovely city you have here, Lieutenant Becker. If only my wife was awake to see it. Dorian sighed dramatically as he spoke aloud, catching the headguard's attention. He decided to try and see if he could glean some information off the shade. He felt Helena pinch him slightly as he spoke, something he promptly ignored. The Shade Lieutenant, a rather tall warrior with an open helmet that showed a rather long face, turned to look at Dorian. Ah, she is your wife, then? Forgive me, Lord Inigo. Fort Sudner has been relatively sheltered from the activities of anything beyond planet Tolptra for the past several years. I have not had the opportunity to hear of your great fame. The lieutenant returned a reply with such care that Dorian felt he could have been a diplomat. Dorian also learned that the planet they were on was called Tolptra from this. That's probably why he got sent to pick me up, huh? I wonder what impression I made on the city lord. Probably a good one. Dorian smiled cheerfully, but instantly replaced the look with a somber one. Yes, she fell victim to a foul plot by an evil human. A vile cretin that not only cast my wife into a wakeless sleep, but also killed my father. Dorian's voice was full of passion as he spoke, anger and rage appearing. He pulled on both the law of wrath and the law of valor to give his words even more of an impact. His acting had certainly improved alongside his strength, that was certain. A man that I shall hunt down and kill for his crimes against the Huma the Shade race. He corrected himself mid-sentence, not losing a step. A murderous human wizard with 6 fingers on his right hand. His words were like that of a tiger settling in to hunt its prey, full of danger as he made up a story, loosely based on a movie he had enjoyed back on Earth. Or, at least, his memories of his life there showed that. Euclid's memories. Dorian frowned, forcing the thought from his mind. Thankfully, the remnant of Euclid that was still in him remained quiet, not stirring. The lieutenant shivered, looking at Dorian in awe. When Dorian spoke, his words carried with them an emotional and spiritual impact that could not be easily described. To the lieutenant and all the guards, it was as if he was a figure out of legend. Soon, the group of guards leading Dorian through the city arrived outside a grand castle located at the center of the city. When they walked through the entrance of the castle, Dorian felt an odd, shivering sensation sweep over him. Is that some type of energy barrier? He thought, his eyes widening slightly. Ever since Dorian began to study several different laws, he had become more and more attuned to anything that carried energy. His soul was already more powerful than a normal Lord-class expert, and far, far more abnormal. Well, it doesn't seem to have done anything. He shrugged and kept moving forward. This way, Lord Inigo. The castle was well lit, with glowing crystals lining the stone walls. The floors were lined with faded and worn purple carpets, old but clearly well maintained. He saw a variety of shades moving through the castle. Several wore plated or practice armor, clearly warriors training, while others wore fine clothes and moved about like nobles. Servants could be seen moving quietly, dressed in plain brown outfits. It's like his own miniature kingdom here, huh? Dorian thought as he saw all of this. The whole castle seemed as if it was abuzz with activity, and as if this was a normal state of being. Soon he found himself inside a small waiting room, led there by the guards. It had a couple of couches and a low wooden table. Some fine paintings hung on the wall, layered in gold. It was a well put together room, not too lavish to be obscene but also not sparsely decorated. Head Steward Damon will be here momentarily. Lieutenant Becker bowed, his voice full of respect as he closed the door behind him, leaving Dorian alone with Helena. He looked down at her, smilingly slightly. He could feel her slowly breathing in and out, resting her head on his chest. She was actually asleep. Dorian walked over to one of the couches and sat down. He took several deep breaths, relaxing as he meditated slightly. In what felt like just a couple of minutes, Dorian woke from his meditation as he heard someone opening the door. "Greetings, Lord Inigo." An elderly shade dressed in a long brown robe, covered in silk ropes and markings, waltzed in, accompanied by a pair of strong-looking guards. Species: Shade. Class: Grandmaster Class, Early. Maximum Energy Level: 221. "Ah yes, greetings." Dorian's voice was calm as he looked at the man he assumed was the steward. He wasn't that strong, on the weaker side of Grandmaster Class, but he was still well above the average being in terms of raw power. "I am Damon, Lord Gabito's head steward. The Lord has sent me to greet you and to inquire upon the reasons for your visit. He is currently in the middle of an important meeting concerning the Church of Light." The steward explained, his eyes zeroed in on Dorian. "I see." Dorian frowned, as if he was displeased by this. "Your lord plans to just ignore my arrival, tossing me off to some of his servants? He is coincidentally in a meeting of great importance that is taking place just as I arrive?" Dorian's voice was full of disbelief. At the same time, he tapped into the law of wrath, making the air around him twist with powerful anger. The overwhelming aura appeared to be too much for the Shade Steward to handle, as well as the two guards that had accompanied him, as all three took a step back. No, that is not what was meant." The Shade Steward's face was pale as he felt Dorian's true might, realizing fully what he was dealing with. "I have slain thousands of beasts with a single slash of my blade. I have studied the sword since birth, training my technique every single day of my life. I have split rocks, boulders, mountains, and even seas." Dorian's eyes flashed, his voice dangerously calm. "When other children were playing with toys, I studied the blade. When lesser warriors spent their time in drunken celebration, I mastered more than 100 martial techniques. While other shades wasted their time in the vain pursuit of power or glory, I cultivated my understanding of the laws." He continued, his voice steady as he forced himself to hold back a smile. "All of this to better our glorious Shade commune. To better the Shade race." He sighed, his voice filled with feigned disappointment. "And yet, when all I wish for is to speak with the city lord of Futner, I am to be ignored?" One thing led to another as Dorian nearly caused the head steward to faint due to his sheer force of presence. The Shade Steward had eventually ended up leaving and talking to the city lord, came back and apologized, and then led Dorian through the castle hall to where the city lord was. The whole process took only a matter of minutes, the impression Dorian created apparently quite convincing. "This is exactly what I wanted. I'm talking to someone of strength and importance who should know where I can go looking for what I need, someone who will be in awe of me and not ask too many questions, while creating a persona of who I am." Dorian thought, mentally frowning. "But why on earth does it have to be like this? All I did was try to twist fate and make him admire my claims of sword skill a bit." When Dorian had arrived, he'd scanned everyone in the dining hall. Species: Shade. Class: Lord Class, Late. Maximum Energy Level: 87,662. Species: Shade. Class: Lord Class, Late. Maximum Energy Level: 91,827. Species: Shade. Class: Lord Class, Pseudo King. Maximum Energy Level: 119,004. Only 3 figures stood out, 2 of which were clearly late Lord Class wizards, a man and a woman, wearing a set of gray robes with the symbol of the Church of Light on it. The other figure, however, was a muscular shade that radiated strength. One that had immediately gone up to greet him, his face eager. The city lord Gabito, as he introduced himself, and after a few verbal exchanges with Dorian where he asked about Dorian's wife, and expressed his condolences, promptly issued a challenge. Great swordmaster, I have heard of your legendary prowess. As a practitioner of the sword myself, I have always been devout in challenging myself to exchange pointers with my peers. Lord Gabito looked at Dorian as if he was a lifesaver, helping ease a stressful day that was full of irritating and or minute work that a city lord has to handle. Would you accept my humble challenge? As the city lord finished speaking, Dorian noticed, out of the corner of his eye, that the female shade wizard was holding a glowing crystal rock. The wizard was glancing at the rock, and then back at Dorian and Helena, her eyes wide. Dorian looked back at the speaker, the city lord of Fort Sutner, his face showing no emotion as he responded. I accept. Dorian smiled slightly, maintaining his air of mysterious strength. At the same time, however, his mind was racing ahead of him as he tried to plan for the fight. I can't let it come out that I'm a fraud. But with such an abrupt challenge, I have no time to prepare. Still, if I really was a swordmaster like Inigo, I would have little reason to refuse a practice duel. He instantly realized, but this is a perfect opportunity. I can create the persona I want to make here, and make it in a way that is completely natural, by someone else's design. Dorian's eyes lit up as he came to the conclusion that this was a blessing in disguise. It has been quite some time since someone challenged me to a practice duel. Where should we have ours? He looked around the dining room doubtfully. There is an inner practice room just down the hall. Lord Gabito said with an eager smile, the worries of the day forgotten. His eagerness to test the man's technique, combined with his complete self-confidence, won over his caution and annoyance. Lord Gabito, I really need to telephone. The female wizard stepped forward, looking directly at the city lord. Later, Patricia, we can discuss that after my duel with the esteemed Lord Inigo. Gabito cut her off, waving Dorian forward. Come, Lord Inigo, I shall lead the way. The city lord walked forward confidently, exiting the dining hall. Dorian followed behind, still carefully carrying Helena. A small troop of guards and attendants followed them, including the two powerful wizards, not wanting to be left behind. Soon, after just a couple dozen scenes of walking, they arrived at the room the city lord had talked about. A large, circular chamber full of practice swords and shields, as well as a variety of other weapons. There were several large circular rings in the center of the room, areas where two warriors would face off and go at each other. We can use practice weapons or real ones, I have no objections. As they arrived, Lord Gabito turned to talk to Dorian, his voice full of excitement. Real ones, of course. I'm sure both of us can adequately protect ourselves. Dorian replied, his voice cool. He walked over to the side of one ring where he carefully set Helena down, making sure the floor was clean. He withdrew a set of clothes that he had folded to act as a pillow under her head. Lord Inigo, are you sure you don't wish to take a room for your wife first so she can rest freely? The city lord's voice was full of concern as he talked to Dorian. Dorian shook his head. I almost lost her once. I will not lose her again. She stays with me. He also didn't trust anyone here, but he wouldn't say that out loud. The attendants and guards gathered around the centermost circle that Dorian had walked over to, spreading out as if this was a regular occurrence. Apparently, the city lord of Fort Sutner was a battle maniac of some sort that challenged warriors on a semi-normal basis. The two wizards from the Church of Light, meanwhile, were quietly whispering at each other in a heated conversation. Dorian spared them a glance before shrugging. It wasn't his business. Lord Gabito walked into the ring first, not changing his outfit or gear. The powerful shade merely removed the longsword from his back, holding it out in front of him as he turned and looked at Dorian closely, studying him. Do you know how I got the nickname the Black Shade of Seven Blades? Dorian's voice was cool as he looked at the city lord, starting to walk into the ring. From his spatial ring, he withdrew a short steel sword, holding it loosely at his side. Lord Gabito shook his head, his eyes still glued to Dorian as he watched his every movement. Dorian felt a similar feeling that the vampire swordmaster Probus had given off. It seemed that Lord Gabito was the real deal when it came to sword technique. It is because I was told my sword techniques are so fast, it is as if I move a single blade as seven. Dorian smiled, not letting a hint of doubt show through. Of course, he wasn't actually a swordmaster. He didn't even know any basic sword techniques, save for the few that Euclid's memory remnants had left before vanishing. None of those were anything special or anything he had practiced either, content as he was using magic and abilities for combat. Whenever you're ready, let us exchange pointers. Dorian nodded politely. Go Lord Gabito, City Lord, prevail, Wu City Lord. As Dorian finished speaking and fully stepped into the ring, a few shouts of encouragement broke out from the watching attendants and guards. For them to be so lax about this, it truly must be a common occurrence, Dorian thought, shrugging. The more people that saw him fight, the better his persona would hold up. Battle maniacs, or other people that were obsessed with growing stronger, were not at all an uncommon sight in the 30,000 worlds. The duel officially started. Without a moment's hesitation, Lord Gabito's body blurred as he rushed in to attack immediately. A powerful aura formed around the man, one that was full of sharp, cutting power from the law of cutting. Dorian saw this and then did something no one in the room was expecting. He moved the sword he was holding loosely in his hand against his hip, as if it was in a sheath, keeping his palm on the hilt. And closed his eyes. Whoosh. Chapter 153 Resolution. City Lord Gabito held back little. The air that Dorian carried himself with, alongside his impressive reputation and powerful aura, had fully convinced the City Lord that Dorian was a powerful opponent. He did not even consider the possibility that Dorian was faking it. Dorian's odd movement to bring his sword to his waist, as if it was put into a sheath while closing his eyes, didn't cause the City Lord to bat an eye. Gabito was a veteran from several campaigns, including the brutal territorial war with the vampire families, known among the nobles as the Invasion of Light. The war itself was an extremely complex one involving disputes over 16 different worlds that the commune and the three families laid claim to. Gabito had seen battle after battle, including all sorts of weird or odd characters, unusual technique after unusual technique. He had long since learned that the most important thing to focus on in a battle is your own offense and defense, to not allow yourself to be distracted by your opponent's unusual tactics. Whoosh. Therefore, the attack City Lord Gabito sent out was a full-force slash, imbued with power from the law of cutting. It didn't involve any mystic martial art or secret technique, but was instead a simple strike, intended to test the waters and gauge Dorian's reaction. The longsword gleamed with power as it cut through the air towards Dorian's chest. White energy flowed around it, the manifested power of law. Dorian's eyes were closed, but he had not given up. Perfect body, activate. Dorian's physique, including his ability to sense his surroundings, increased tremendously. At the same time, Dorian focused deeply on the world around him, sending his senses outward to detect energy. After gaining access to 4 separate laws, Dorian's soul had become incredibly adept when it came to sensing energy from different laws, especially when that energy was directly manifested. While he couldn't always use that energy, especially if it was a law he had not experienced a baptism in, he could still feel it. He had closed his eyes to help him concentrate, zeroing in on any outside energy sources. And now, as he fully focused, his senses enhanced, an image of the world around him appeared in his mind. The image was vague and distorted, lit up by bright specks of energy. One speck, in particular, that was just a meter away from him, headed directly towards his chest. The attack from the City Lord. Whoosh, clang, boom. A small explosion of energy rang out as the sword strike stabbed right towards Dorian. And was deflected, causing the blade to smash off to the right and stab into the ground, gouging a 2-meter-long gash in the reinforced stone floor that the practice room was made of. Lord Gabito jumped backwards, looking at the damaged floor and then at Dorian in surprise. Confusion filled his eyes, as if he didn't understand what had happened. The City Lord's attack was deflected? What? But Lord Inigo didn't move. What happened? His eyes were closed. The onlooking attendants and guards all stared in confusion, looking at Dorian. Dorian smiled calmly. Are you just going to play around, Lord Gabito? Or are you going to attack for real? It worked. Internally, he was cheering himself on. When Dorian sensed the direction and location that the attack was coming from, he had activated a second ability. His lesser magnetic manipulation ability. It was an ability he had picked up a long time ago that allowed him to manipulate metallic objects. And the weapon that the City Lord was using was a metal sword that fell into this category. Thankfully he hadn't used some type of weird artifact weapon of any sort, Otherwise Dorian would have had to go with a separate plan. By using the ability, he could forcibly redirect the blade. However, instead of trying to take full control of the weapon, Dorian had simply thrown a single, powerful blast, loaded with energy, against the sword. At the same time he pulled on fate slightly, to help redirect the strike. These two factors combined together to cause the longsword strike that was aimed at his chest to miss completely, all while he stayed still, unmoving, with his eyes shut. "Patricia, did you feel that?" Off to the side, the male wizard from the Church of Light, Gavin, whispered to the other, his eyes glinting. Yes, the energy he used was minute, but he definitely executed some sort of technique right there. Only, Patricia frowned, her expression confused. "I couldn't see anything." She shook her head as she looked from the strange shade to the bundled figure of Helena sleeping on the ground. "Who are you? And why does my sigil detect the presence of a vampire between you and your wife?" Shades came in many shapes, colors, and sizes, much like that of humans. Because Helena was wrapped up in clothes, able to ignore the sunny heat outside due to her physique, it wasn't possible to see if she had the telltale dark points that all shades had. Therefore, she was indistinguishable, race-wise, from many other shades. "Ha ha ha ha, impressive, Lord Inigo. I apologize for testing the waters. I will now go at this duel with full seriousness. Let us learn from each other." Back at the duel practice ground, the city lord laughed out loud as he boisterously raised his longsword again. This time, however, the air around him took on a concentrated aura. An aura that was sharp and powerful, full of raging power and might. Some type of stance or technique related to a mystic martial art. Wait, he actually was playing around? Internally, Dorian's eyes widened. "I was just trying to sound impressive, damn it. You don't need to get all serious on me." Dorian mentally swore. He had never seen the city lord fight and had assumed his first strike had been a full-powered attack. "You have earned my respect with your deflection of my basic strike. Your movement was so quick I could only sense the energy remnant from your technique. It is extremely rare to meet a warrior of your caliber. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity." The city lord went off on a monologue as he lauded Dorian and complimented him. Dorian frowned ever so slightly as he heard this, however, not liking where it was going. This sounds like the speech a villain gives before he unleashes his ultimate attack. "This next technique is my ultimate attack," Gabito promptly continued, as if on cue. "Oh, come on." Dorian decided to stop mentally commentating on things. He felt like he was jinxing himself. The city lord raised his blade up above his head, locking eyes with Dorian. The aura around Lord Gabito seemed to sharpen, becoming even stronger. "This is the Raging Emperor Martial Arts 12 Rushing Rivers Explosion. The mystic martial art draws upon the natural laws of the universe through my natural movement with the blade, forming an incredible 96 slash technique." The city lord's voice was full of authority as he took a step forward. 96 slashes? That's just excessive. Why not 12? Or just 6? What's wrong with 6? He mentally cursed for a second time. Why were all the people he met so abnormal? "Please guide me." The city lord's voice was full of genuine respect as his body blurred, blasting toward Dorian. The air around Lord Gabito distorted as multiple white lines of energy rippled, full of fierce power. Here, the city lord is going all out. Everyone back up. That shade is a goner now." A deluge of voices broke out as the attendants all retreated, pulling back away from the scene of the fight. The guards stayed steady as they watched the battle, several of them resting their hands on the hilt of their blades as they looked at Dorian nervously. "Oh, wow, the city lord is far stronger than what was reported by the church." Patricia muttered as she saw this, her eyes widening as she continued. "Strength like that places him among the upper tier of lord-class fighters, even among the church elites. He's a veteran from the territorial war that chose to head east after retiring. Anyone that fought in that war and survived is bound to have some level of strength, save, perhaps, for the common foot soldiers." Gavin responded brusquely. He shook his head as he continued. "Be ready to heal Lord Inigo, Patricia. The Shade certainly has some level of skill, but I doubt he'll be able to withstand that attack." Patricia nodded, her eyes sharpening. "Of course, even I would not be able to escape this unscathed. We can use that as an excuse to investigate what's going on with him and his wife." Her eyes trailed back over towards Dorian. "Fine, I can handle this." Dorian's eyes flashed, pushing aside his worry as he felt the incredible force the City Lord generated. It was an extremely strong attack, a mystic martial art that had been mastered to an extremely high level. The man in front of him was clearly worthy of the title Swordmaster. But compared to the Holy Prince Isaac's awe-inspiring blows, it was only so-so. If I could deal with the Shade Prince, I can deal with this. Dorian shut his eyes once more. Whoosh! The world around him devolved into vague shapes and blips of energy. Right in front of him, however, Dorian saw something that was terrifying. It looked like a dozen snakes, flashing with bright, chaotic energy, soaring through the air, all directed towards his heart. Each snake of energy contained bright, white light within them, the inherent power of the law of cutting, granting each strike incredible potency. Even with his perfect body ability activated, a single blow from one of those snakes of energy would shred through his basic defenses and injure him. That was, if a blow could land, and if he ignored his other abilities. Whoosh! Energy from the law of valor, the law of greed, the law of wrath, and the law of mercy flooded into Dorian's veins, all at once. He transformed into a vast, distorted concentration of power as Ra might cause the air around him to shiver with power. To the onlookers, Dorian hadn't moved a muscle and was still standing still, while the City Lord's strike was about to land on him. In that instant, however, as Dorian simultaneously drew on 4 laws at once, his aura changed. It was as if he had become a fierce god of death in their eyes. His aura shot up to incredibly fierce levels as his laws mixed, creating a horrifying, unstoppable air. His presence was like that of a giant, looking down upon tiny, wayward ants. Half of the attendants passed out directly, fainting. The other half stood frozen in terror, unable to make a move. The guards all stood frozen as well, jaws dropped as their hands fell to the side, limp. What in the heavens? Patricia stared at Dorian as if he was a freakish monster. How? Gavin muttered, his eyes wide. Boom! The City Lord's right arm blurred as he struck out. The fighter was so concentrated and in tune with his own attack that he had completely blocked out Dorian's aura, and was thus temporarily unaffected. The dozen snakes of energy slammed down towards Dorian as, in reality, the white streams of energy appeared, flowing mysteriously. All of the snakes of energy formed together into a single, thick snake of energy that combined with the City Lord's blade, carrying with it enough force to split a mountain. The City Lord then began to attack. Lord Gabito's body itself was blurred as slash after slash, blow after blow, rained down upon Dorian's body. A full 96 separate slashes cut towards Dorian, all in the space of a few seconds. The incredibly fast, incredibly potent technique was the ultimate move of the City Lord, combining his every ounce of talent and skill into a single blow. An attack that he had mastered from his years and years of experience and intense training, focusing on nothing other than gaining the power to defend himself after he experienced the horrors of extended warfare many years ago. Boom! Clang! 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 A series of metallic clangs rang out as Dorian activated his lesser magnetic manipulation ability, over and over, dozens of times. Block! 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 Dorian's mind raced into overdrive as strike after strike was deflected. Every time, he had to forcibly concentrate a certain level of energy and explode it forward while simultaneously drawing upon his soul to twist fate and ensure the attack missed. The process was incredibly straining on him, causing his soul to feel a massive amount of stress. He spent a massive amount of energy. However, cool energy rushed into his soul from a new source. Energy from the law of greed, a law focused on enhancing the soul. Thanks to this, Dorian was able to adeptly manipulate each strike, blocking blow after blow after blow, despite the huge drain to his soul. Clang! 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 Everything was happening extremely quickly. Dorian's mind moved with an almost instinctive level of control as he redirected 95 of the sword strikes. Great heavens above, he's moving his blade so fast it can't even be seen. I can't even see his arm move, let alone his sword. Gavin sputtered, his voice a hiss as he turned to Patricia. Inconceivable. Patricia's voice was similarly shocked. Each strike from the Swordmaster was slowly increasing in power and might as the City Lord's 12 rushing rivers explosion technique went through its full cycle. The technique was a complicated one that built itself up as it went forward, becoming stronger and stronger. Through the use of this technique, Lord Gabito had remained undefeated ever since the war ended. As the city lord felt his attacks be deflected, however, strike after strike redirected by attacks he could not even see, an indescribable feeling overwhelmed him. A feeling of pure, unadulterated awe. Take my final strike, Lord Inigo, and I will fully admit my defeat. Fervor filled the city lord's voice as he yelled out loud, his voice booming. Raw energy rocketed off of him in waves, causing the air to stir. The last, and 96th blow of the complex technique, cut through the air towards Dorian's chest. Every single iota of energy the city lord had went into this blow, the full power of all 12 snakes of energy combining together one last time, built up to a powerful crescendo. Dorian looked at it as he opened his eyes fully, a calm smile on his face. His left arm blurred as he brought it up and held it out just in front of his chest, right at the incoming attack. Mystic armored body ability, perfect body ability, cover me. Law of valor, enhance my defenses. Law of wrath and mercy, combine and cover my hand in a palm strike. Law of greed, enhance my soul to handle it all. His mind mentally commanded his powers. At the same time, he shifted his body slightly so he was standing directly in front of Helena, shielding her from anything that came about as a result of this attack. The longsword slammed forward and collided with Dorian's left palm. Boom! A rippling explosion of white light shook the arena air, throwing up a huge gust of wind and an equally large shockwave. Everyone below Grandmaster class, including most of the attendants, were thrown backwards like ragdolls. The ground and ceiling of the practice room were magically enhanced and reinforced, but were unable to bear the brunt of the impact. A large, stone crater formed in the ground where Dorian and Lord Gabito had collided, stone shrapnel and dust blasting off and covering the area. Rippling white energy shot out erratically, crackling in the air. Whoosh! As the dust cleared, the few guards that had managed to keep their feet, including the 2 wizards from the Church of Light whose innate barriers had shielded them, saw the result. The newly formed crater had a visible line marring it, untouched by the blow. A line that led to the body of Helena that was resting peacefully on the ground, unharmed. At the center of that line, near the center of the crater, Dorian stood calmly, holding the blade of the city lord's longsword in his bare hand. Lord Gabito stared up at Dorian, Dorian's powerful aura washing over him. Not bad, city lord. Heavens above, he's not just at the level of a swordmaster. Patricia stared at Dorian, her body trembling in fear. His skill is approaching that of a sword saint. The commune is going to give birth to a new saint. Chapter 154 A New Journey. Heavens above, he's not just at the level of a swordmaster. Patricia stared at Dorian, her body trembling in fear. His skill is approaching that of a sword saint. The commune is going to give birth to a new saint. In the 30,000 worlds, mystic martial arts were the single largest grouping of powerful physical techniques. Almost all mystic martial arts involved a visualization of some type. When one grew skilled enough with a technique, one would be labeled a swordmaster, an axemaster, a spearmaster, or a variety of other similar titles indicating this. Dorian had actually met a swordmaster before. Probus, of the Aurelius Reavers. Probus studied the law of cutting, meaning his skill as a swordmaster was put into even greater effect. Of those that practiced a skill or technique to a high level, the most common, by far, were swordmasters, simply due to the fact that a vast number of popular mystic martial arts focused on swordplay. As for how one could come to be considered a master of any weapon, for most in the 30,000 worlds, it was a test of power. If one was able to unleash a technique using their weapon of choice that could cause catastrophic damage, without using magic, one met the general bar to be called a swordmaster. While true skill did not always involve raw power, this was still the most commonly accepted way of proof. Above swordmasters, however, there existed a higher tier. A tier of experts that stood head and shoulders above others. Freakishly skilled individuals that no amount of hard work could ever seem to match. Physical warriors that were able to challenge the strongest wizards and stand on even ground. The experts that strove for the peak and stood mightily above all other warriors. The saints. It was known that, in the 30,000 worlds, if 2 people had equally strong soul spell matrices, but one was a wizard while the other was a martial artist, typically the wizard would be stronger. Mystic martial arts were powerful, but magic was far more versatile, able to easily draw upon the energy of the universe to create fantastic spells. Those that stood at the peak of skill, the saints, were able to surmount that gap and fight evenly with wizards of the same level. One and all, they were considered mighty figures, so adept with martial arts that almost nothing could stop them. Whether it be race or creed, chosen laws or techniques, those that were considered saints were a diverse group, with experts spanning many different ranges. Their one common denominator was raw skill. The number of masters of a technique or weapon in the 30,000 worlds was too large a number to count. There were trillions and trillions and trillions of beings in existence. Just by sheer numbers alone, it was possible to come across tens of thousands of masters. It was not the same for the saints. The difficulty in achieving the level of a saint was considered a sheer impossibility to most. To even become one, you had to be a freakishly talented individual. In the 30,000 worlds, across the trillions and trillions of creatures that existed, there were less than 100 known saints. An extremely small number. Swordmaster Inigo, how blind I was. Boom. Lord Gabito's right knee slammed into the ground, cracking the already cratered stone as he bowed his head. His previously sharp aura vanished, replaced by one of humility. Forgive my impertinence. Thank you for humoring my challenge. As he spoke, Gabito's forehead was covered in a sheen of sweat. Awe and fear fought each other in his eyes as he witnessed Dorian's sheer display of skill. Lord Gabito was a wizened expert. He had lived for well more than 100 years and fought in hundreds of battles. He had seen his fair share of experts and very few could drive him to his wits' end. However, experts that could do what Dorian had just done were far and few between in Lord Gabito's eyes. The last time he felt a sense of awe like this was when he personally witnessed one of the three Excelsiors that served under the High Priest of the Church of Light, Excelsior Larcaster, Duel, one of the Aurelius family generals during the Territorial War. It was then he witnessed what true, elite skill was capable of. The terrible battle was imprinted on his mind, the power of the strong. The awe he felt then, it was the exact same here. Dorian simply smiled back quietly, as if it was nothing. He looked mysterious and wise, an expert whose power was unrivaled. It's nothing. In return for that little spar, I have a small favor I'd like to ask of you. His eyes flashed. Anything, great warrior, it would be my honor. Lord Gabito's hand pounded his chest as he yelled a response, the air around him still crackling from the remnants of their clash. Dorian gave him a nod and asked, "Where might I find powerful medicine to treat injuries to the soul?" "Patricia, what do we do?" Gavin pulled at his hair, the light wizard at a complete loss. He was standing in a small study, still wearing his durable Church of Light robes. The study was part of a larger private room and connected to a pair of private bedrooms, assigned to them by the city lord. "I don't know," the female light wizard muttered, rubbing her eyes. "It's still there." She held up her hand, where a small glowing sigil could be seen, and continued. "The presence of a vampire remains on Lord Inigo and his wife." "It obviously has to be his wife." Gavin cut in, shrugging. "Yes, I agree. Her entire situation is suspicious. It's possible she is gravely ill, but to also coincidentally need to be wrapped up in cloth, hiding her dark points?" Patrica's eyes flashed. "I am 95% certain she is a vampire," she concluded. "Only 95%? Gavin looked at her curiously. Patricia was the de facto leader of the duo and usually followed her lead. "There is a 5% chance that something else is causing the sigil to go off." Patricia sighed. "But even so, how could we ask Lord Inigo? If he really is secretly allied with the vampires, he will kill us immediately or lie about it and kill us later. If not, we will have badly offended him and his wife. His skill is approaching that of a saint, and making an enemy of that caliber is foolish." She rubbed her eyes again, frustrated. Highly skilled warriors were notoriously touchy about topics regarding pride. It was not at all uncommon for those at the peak to attack those that slighted them, or at least hinder them. A shade like Lord Inigo, he was destined for greatness. Becoming his enemy unnecessarily would be unwise. She swore aloud, walking over to a brown woolen couch that was in the study and kicking it. The couch flipped over from the force, smashing into the wall. "Trish," Gavin responded, holding his hand out at a loss. "It's fine," the female light wizard said after a moment as she vented her irritation on the poor couch, obliterating it. "We will send word to the headquarters." Her mouth twisted as she said that, as if she hated admitting she couldn't handle a situation. We will wait to see what they say. Dorian sat in a finely adorned room, his hands folded together. A pensive look appeared on his face as he looked at Helena's resting figure. The vampire actually was sleeping on a luxurious-looking couch, her body requiring much more sleep than usual due to its condition. A superior auction, huh? He muttered, his mouth twisting. He had talked with Lord Gabido for several minutes. According to the talented warrior, medicine that could heal injuries to the soul were a rare find here on Plantera. Indeed, they were rare on any world. Injuries to the body were far more common than injuries to the soul. As a result, most people sold or traded in medicine or pills that focused on that. Further, it was much harder to treat an injury to the soul than to that of the body. Thus, pills that could heal those injuries required a high level of skill and a powerful soul spell matrix. This, added on to their low demand, made the pills hold an extraordinary price. In Fort Sudner, there was a large auction hosted every month called the Normal Auction. The auction was run by the Golden Moon Mercenary Alliance, surprising Dorian. The massive mercenary organization had several branches of business, and one of them was an auction organization that spanned thousands of worlds. The Normal Auction was, as its name suggested, somewhat normal. For those below the Lord class, it could be considered a grand function trading rare weapons, pills, inheritances, manuals, and spellbooks. But to those at the Lord class, oftentimes the Normal Auction was just normal. Occasionally there would be something rare or powerful, but that was the Normal Auction's limit. It couldn't be helped. Fort Sudner was a city protected by a Lord class expert, but Lord Gabido happened to be one of only a very few Lord class experts that regularly lived in the city, despite its large size. Lord class experts were not a common occurrence when compared to the general population. There might come 10,000 Grandmaster class experts without a single Lord class expert arising. The difficulty in grasping a law was just that high. The next Normal Auction is in 12 days. Even if I go to it, it's unlikely they will have anything that can treat Helena. I'm also not exactly wealthy, he muttered as he looked over his spatial ring. He'd used up a huge amount of the resources in his spatial ring over time, buying various things. He still had some of the high-level gold shields from the Boral autarky, and a few artifacts here and there, but nothing that would stand out as very rare or expensive. I need to make a lot of money really quickly or find some rare treasures, stuff that will be worth a lot. Why didn't I snag a few treasures from the Ascension ruins instead of absorbing as many as I could, damn it. He swore and shook his head. His thoughts had been fully focused on saving Wool, he hadn't even considered looting anything. Further, I need to move to a planet that has a superior auction. According to Lord Gabido, he wouldn't be able to find a single superior auction anywhere on Plantera. The world had a lot of unique resources with its odd plant-based lifeforms, but not enough to draw the attention and worth of a superior auction, apparently. Superior auctions could be found on exotic or major worlds, and rarely on worlds that bordered unique exotic worlds. The auctions were held once every 3 months at each location, and usually drew a huge amount of attention. Lord-class experts were common and even King-class experts could be found in attendance, bidding for rare treasures. At this level, many cultivators eschewed normal currency, even the enhanced and magic currency from the Boral autarky, preferring to trade directly with magic herbs, pills, rare artifacts, or other types of treasures. Of the worlds with a superior auction on them, only 2 of them are anywhere near me. The major world of Eneron, home to the headquarters of the Church of Light, roughly 12 planets distant, and the normal world of Shaptel, 6 planets distant. Leaving the territory of the Shade Commune would require crossing 38 worlds in total. He said aloud, thinking it through. Eneron is a no-go. I absolutely need to avoid interacting with any major figures from the Church of Light. Walking up their doorstep would be incredibly foolish. I also don't think I could cross 38 different worlds under the control of the Shade Commune and remain undiscovered, so that's not an option. He shook his head. That only leaves Shaptel. Shaptel borders the highly dangerous exotic world of Moria, a ruined world full of danger and treasure, drawing thousands of powerful explorers and treasure seekers. Home to the former headquarters of the now fallen demon race, he muttered, rubbing his chin. This was all information he'd received directly from Lord Gabido. All of it seemed reliable. The demons, huh? He frowned. I remember Leader said there was a demonic inheritance deep within Shade territory. It was how he fully came to understand the law of pride. This might be related to that. Only, it sounds incredibly dangerous. Do I really want to take Helena anywhere near that, in her current state? He talked it over. Groan. Dorian's thoughts were thrown into disarray as he turned, looking at Helena. The injured vampire had shifted in her sleep, unconsciously letting out a moan. The pain she was going through was constant and significant, a side effect of her badly injured soul. His eyes hardened. I don't have a choice. It's only 6 planets away. I need to get her treated as soon as possible so we can escape at full speed without putting her at risk. His eyes flashed, determination filling them. To Chaptel it is. Chapter 155 Reputation. You see that shade right there? That's the legendary Seven-Blade Swordmaster, Lord Inigo Montoya. HMPH. Our old Captain Basalt became a spearmaster after he joined the King's army. What makes this Lord Inigo so special? He doesn't look that strong. I heard it directly from one of Lord Gabito's attendants when they booked him for the ship. Lord Inigo has almost reached the realm of a saint in skill. Huh? No way. Stuff like that is always fake. Dorian smiled slightly as he heard 2 shade youths talking to each other in a quiet whisper. Each youth wore a black and white striped uniform, the attire of all the workers on the ship. Dorian's finely tuned senses could clearly hear their words, even from several dozen meters away, across the deck of a ship. He turned around, though, glancing about the wooden deck. He was standing at the front of the ship. The ship itself looked like a traditional wooden ship, complete with white cloth sails and a large mast. It was a galley, a large one, with multiple floors. Multiple workers moved across the deck, checking various parts of it or washing it down. He also saw a pair of wizards covered in white glows checking over the sails, apparently directing the flight of the ship. The galley had just started to travel, lifting off from Fort Sudner and floating about 100 meters in the air about it. They hadn't moved away yet, still setting up to leave. After talking with Lord Gabito, Dorian had made up his mind. He was headed off towards the former home base of the demon race and the superior auction located right next door. With that as his focus, he had informed the city lord that he would be leaving, headed off towards the planet of Chaptel. The city lord had taken it well and even helped set him up with the biggest traveling company in Fort Sudner, the Flying Plantera Fleet. The company apparently had a monopoly in regards to on-planet travel and operated in all the major cities. Their ships only traveled on planet, however, eschewing everything else and keeping them domestically focused. He would need to get another ship for when he left Plantera. Dorian turned his head away from the deck, looking down. He couldn't see through the wood, but he felt like he could almost sense Helena's presence as she rested, secure and peaceful in their private room. The door was sealed with a magic lock of some sort, meaning he could give her some privacy when she rested, secure and safe, while he came above deck. Whoosh! The ship vibrated as it began to move forward, powered using magic energy. Light flashed around it, surrounding it completely, as it soared high into the air and began to rush forward, accelerating at a gradual pace. After flying on several of the magic ships that were common to the 30,000 worlds, Dorian had grown accustomed to the feeling. He settled down on the front of the ship. On a world not far from Dorian, the dark figure that had been talking with Duke Orbit about finding the inheritor of Wrath sat down patiently on a wooden chair. He was sitting in a small inn-room in a random city on the planet. In front of him was a black-robed shade giving a report, one of the spies serving the demonic council. The council had one of the best intelligence agencies in the Shade Commune, one that was capable of gaining huge amounts of information in extremely small amounts of time. If they put their full focus on something, it was impossible for that thing to stay hidden for long. Ruler Hallow, there are 12 possible locations across 7 eastern planets that show traces of demonic power. Of those, only 3 of them have been previously investigated and can be discounted. The Duke's hunters have narrowed these locations down, but are unable to search further. Hallow grunted and nodded. Most of the Duke's subordinates were bound to be regular shades. Orbit obviously couldn't make it known that he studied a demonic law. The shades would therefore be unable to investigate further. Most laws were abstruse and difficult to grasp, even the simpler ones. As a result of this, it could be almost impossible to tell what law someone studied if that person was trying to conceal it or pass it off as another one. Using energy or power from a demonic law but claiming it was from a similar, non-demonic law, it would be extremely hard for even king-class experts to tell the difference. Some laws were exceptions to this due to their well-known effects. But most were not. Only demonic law practitioners could instantly recognize other demonic law practitioners. Orbit had estimated the power he sensed as between the peak of Lord class and the middle of King class, within that range. Hallow guessed their target would be around early King class. Alright, of the 9 locations, which ones have had any unusual activity near them? Hallow's glowing blue eyes flashed as he spoke, his voice cool and assured. There was a large explosion on the planet of Phasfa, where the remnants of demonic power were found. On the planet of Tabadel, a local war has broken out between 2 kingdoms that are vying for power. Demonic power was detected at the site of one of their battlefields. The robed shade continued to speak. There was also movement from one of the new rising stars of the Shade race, Lord Inigo Montoya, the Shade of 7 Blades, on the planet of Plantera, near a zone where traces of demonic power were detected. What's his class? Hallow interrupted his subordinate, a Lord-class swordmaster of high skill, allegedly claimed to be nearing the level of a saint. He is on a mission to heal the injured soul of his wife and defeated a local city lord in a spar. The city lord was a veteran of some small renown during the territorial war. His reputation is that of a valorous shade. Oh, I see. Hallow shrugged dismissively. If it was so easy to have reached the level of a saint, everyone would reach it. People claimed to be nearing it all the time. There were trillions of shades in existence, and while Lord-class shades were a rarity, just because of sheer numbers there were bound to be tens of thousands, perhaps more, of them. New rising stars appearing among the Lord class wasn't something to be surprised about. Besides, there was no way their target would be so foolish as to act like a great expert and go on a highly visible public journey. They would have to know or at least suspect that they were being hunted. Only an idiot would do that. Continue the report. One of these locations must have their target. Wow, he really is a great expert. Did you see that? He killed it in a single shot. Whoa, please, take me as your disciple. You all are too kind. I merely have some small measure of skill. Dorian's voice was calm and relaxed as he sheathed his sword, looking over at the cheering crew members. Just moments ago, Dorian's meditation had been rudely interrupted. Their flying ship had traveled for several hours, crossing a huge portion of the planet. Due to their great height, Dorian had only been able to see the tops of the forests or plains below. He did see quite a few abnormally large trees and odd-looking, green-colored beasts, but nothing that posed any threat to them. The journey had gone quite peacefully. In fact, it was around this point that an enormous, grass-covered bird had appeared, flying towards their ship like an arrow released from a bow. The bird was huge, easily a dozen meters tall, with a massive wingspan. It was covered in long strips of grass and vines, giving off a very faint, natural aura. It cawed loudly as it charged, its voice irritatingly piercing. Species: Winged Grass Gorak. Class: Grandmaster, Pseudo-Lord. Maximum energy level: 5281. The creature had roused Dorian from his meditation. As he instantly came aware of his surroundings, he noticed the duo of wizards manning the ship preparing countermeasures. He could sense the energy they were gathering for some type of mighty spell, one that ought to be able to take the winged grass Gorak out. The organization had a monopoly on air travel on planet for a reason. If they weren't even able to handle random threats like this, it would be a bit much. Excuse me, passenger, I'm going to need you to return below deck right now. A voice broke into his thoughts as he was looking at the wizards. Dorian turned to see one of the sailors that crewed the flying ship, a muscular man with a broad chest, staring at him with an annoyed expression on his face that he quickly hid. The sailor wore a white and black striped uniform that was fancier than the ones the other sailors were wearing, signifying a position of some importance on the ship. We are about to engage in combat. Civilians like yourself would only be in the way. The sailor waved at him dismissively. Despite that, his eyes seemed to contain a certain level of enjoyment and arrogance. Dorian frowned slightly as he heard this. What the sailor said wasn't exactly wrong. After all, they were being charged at by a powerful beast. In his shade form, Dorian hardly looked very threatening. Most of his power was self-contained, and if he didn't willingly release his aura, he would appear very normal. 99.99% of people that looked like this would be weak. But the way the Shade Sailor went about it was a bit rude and rather petty, as if he was relishing the power to order about the passengers and did this often. He was technically in the right, but Dorian's eyes flashed. As Dorian saw this, he realized this was an excellent opportunity. What was he trying to do? He wanted to create a huge reputation for his current form. This reputation could act as a cover, shielding him and Helena as they traveled while giving him all the plausible deniability he needed. He had defeated Lord Gabito in a spar, but that information was likely to spread rather slowly. There were some eyewitnesses, but most were loyal to the Lord. Of those that would speak, most would likely remain in or near Fort Sudner, or keep their reports private. He needed his reputation to spread among the general populace. He wanted to become one of the best-known shades in the Shade Commune, a literal celebrity. After all, who would suspect someone like that? As long as he could twist fate when questioned to make his cover bulletproof, the plan was destined for success in Dorian's opinion. Hyperion Beam. Charge. Instantly, he began charging his Hyperion Beam ability. However, instead of having the black orb form above his palm, Dorian slowly drew the sword from his waist, holding it out. "Hey, what are you doing?" The belligerent sailor glared at Dorian as he drew his weapon, yelling at him. Dorian ignored him. The crackling orb of energy formed at the tip of his sword, drawing from Dorian's soul spell matrix as well as the air around him. Dorian's soul had reached an impressive level of strength, something his Hyperion Beam put to great use as it charged up at a faster rate than ever before. In just a split second, Dorian had formed a threatening orb the size of his fist. If he kept charging, he knew he could make it even stronger. However, Dorian had a different plan in mind. Black flames, combined with it. Fire magic. Blazing sword. He activated another one of his abilities and also cast one of the few magic spells he knew. The stronger he got, the more he realized how powerful abilities were. Magic, in comparison, was more versatile and had a variety of uses. But to really get anything powerful from it, he would need to study in a dedicated way for years and years, and that was with his incredible talent as an Ifrit and luck. He could be a jack of all trades and a master of none, or he could put his focus in one specific area. Dorian decided to focus more on the laws he was learning and his abilities. He needed power fast and magic would take too long for him. In just a moment, the black orb at the end of his blade transformed into a crackling black sword covered in flames. The energy sword actually covered his blade entirely, making it seem as if his own weapon was the one creating the disturbance. The crackling orb hadn't drawn any attention due to the crew focusing on the charging winged grass Gorak. His black, flame-covered sword, one that was warping the air around it, however, was very eye-catching. The sailor that had been yelling at him stumbled back, his face paling as he saw this. Several of the other sailors all shouted, looking at Dorian in surprise. At the same time this was formed, Dorian drew upon the laws of mercy and valor. He imbued the law of mercy within his sword while using the law of valor to give himself a valorous and heroic aura. The law of mercy was a law that focused on enhancing the offensive power of something. It was similar to the law of wrath in that it was full of energy, throbbing and mighty. The only real difference between the two types of energy was that the law of mercy had cool, controlled energy while the law of wrath contained chaotic, violent energy. What the goodness! Look at that! Whoa, there's an expert on board. It seems the head wizards won't get a turn against the Gorak. What spell is that? It reminds me of the old captain's attacks. Almost everyone on deck was a member of the crew. Few of the passengers were like Dorian and wanted to meditate while looking out at the planet. The crew's discussion was full of surprise and awe as they saw the power Dorian wielded. They also talked in a hushed manner, not wanting to offend Dorian. Most of them seemed fairly relaxed. The winged grass Gorak appeared to be a type of beast they had faced down before with little incident. One of the few non-crew members, a man wearing a sharp-looking brown suit, looked at Dorian's charged attack, his eyes filled with interest. "Unleash," Dorian said out loud as he aimed the sword at the charging beast, his eyes cool. He twisted fate slightly, to make him seem even more majestic. Whoosh! The beam of energy blasted forward off his sword. It moved incredibly quickly, searing the air itself as it slammed into the still charging winged grass Gorak, just a few dozen or so meters away. Squaw WWKKK. The Gorak yelled out loud as the beam slammed into the flying beast and melted a huge hole right through its chest. The beam of energy then shot forward off into the air, blasting into the sky till it left their sight and entered chaotic space. With hardly a whimper after, the grass-winged Gorak tumbled down from the air, plummeting as it was killed in an instant. Incredible, awesome. A burst of applause and cheers broke out as the crew ran up and congratulated or thanked Dorian. The high-ranking sailor that had previously tried to order Dorian about was nowhere to be seen, having fled below deck. Dorian smiled as he took it all in, acting the part of the hero. He waved at everyone and shook hands, becoming a friendly figure. He answered the questions of the crew, explaining his mission and goal freely. A new hero has appeared among the Shade race and is headed for the ruins of the Demon Emperor? I've never heard of this Lord Inigo before. Information on him might be worth quite a bit. One of the other passengers on deck during the attack, a Shade wearing a sharp-looking brown suit, nodded his head cheerfully. The Shade, a well-known merchant on Plantera, eyed Dorian carefully. His fingers clinked as he clapped them together, several large gems set onto rings banging against each other. The Shade turned, heading below deck as he pulled out a small artifact shaped like a bird. Soon, Dorian managed to free himself from the questions of the crew, returning below deck to care for a resting Helena. The rest of the journey across planet passed smoothly, but the impact Dorian had made on everyone present was already beginning to spread. In what felt like no time at all, the ship began to land, just outside a huge world bridge that led to another normal world. This particular world bridge towered upwards, covered in brown rock and sand, like that of a giant desert. A large city could be seen near the base of the world bridge. "Don't worry, my sweet dove," Dorian whispered quietly as he looked at the sleeping Helena. He stroked her hair, full of care. Her body was covered in sweat as she shifted in her sleep, sick and unwell. "I am on my way to get you help." Chapter 156 Greeting. At the headquarters of the Church of Light, on the planet of Eneron, an elderly Shade could be seen sitting peacefully in a large garden. Resplendent plants of all types grew from the earth in this garden, beautiful roses that gave off pink auras to glowing tulips that dripped sunlight, to an even larger assortment of wonders. This elderly man, wearing a long white gown with the insignia of the Church of Light on it, looked around at the beautiful garden, a look of pure bliss on his face as he smiled. "Inner peace," he mumbled, his eyes closing as he entered a meditative stance. The elderly man took a deep breath, causing the air around him to shiver with force. This sheer display of physical power, the ability to cause a minor storm simply by taking a breath, made it apparent that the physical body of this elderly man was at a ridiculous level. The wind buffeted the various plants, but for the most part, was unable to damage them. All of them were quite unusual specimens and extremely resistant to physical attacks or blows. As the wind shivered, however, a single petal from one of the glowing roses slipped off, fluttering through the air. This petal eventually floated until it was right in front of the elderly man. He took a second deep breath, this time breathing through his nose. The rose petal shot upward, right into his nose. Arrgh. The elderly man let out a hoarse yell as he quickly exhaled, sending the rose petal fluttering back out. A second wind storm formed as he opened his eyes and sputtered, glaring at the offending petal and rose. "How dare you, traitorous heavens blush rose, offend this Shade again and you shall be beheaded at dawn." The elderly man sputtered at the rose and patted his chest as he looked at it angrily, and slightly hurt, as if it had betrayed him. As he spoke, a heaven-shaking aura burst forth around him, full of ancient power and might. The rose, not unexpectedly, ignored the elderly man and the powerful aura that the offended Shade unleashed. Excelsior Gaiman! Excelsior Gaiman! Before the elderly Shade could take further action, an armor-clad Shade burst into the garden area, from a path that led to the enclosure. What? Excelsior Gaiman, one of the three mighty Excelsiors of the Church of Light, powerful generals that were second only to the High Priest himself, turned to look at the armored Shade in an irritated manner. "I beg your pardon, Holy Excelsior, for the interruption." The armored Shade wore a full set of white plate armor, save for a helmet which he held in his hands, and had a courageous air about him. He dropped to one knee as he looked at the powerful elderly Shade, however, his voice full of passion as he continued. "A matter has arisen that requires your attention. Bishop Hammond of the Ripple sent me to report to you." Gaiman looked at the armored Shade expectantly. From the armor he wore, Gaiman could tell that the Shade was a captain in the Church Guard, the planetary fighting force that defended the headquarters of the Church of Light. The armored Shade didn't continue, as if waiting for orders or a response. "Well, spit it out, damn it, man. Don't you know how old I am? I could die before you finish reporting." Gaiman glared at the armored Shade, shaking an elderly fist. The captain visibly withered as he heard this, his voice shooting out rapid fire as he quickly made his report. "One of the wizard teams sweeping the eastern worlds for vampires has encountered an unordinary situation on the planet of Plantera and is requesting advice." After hearing of the situation, Bishop Hammond was unable to determine a response and has asked that the matter be decided upon by Thines ELF. "Oh?" Gaiman's eyes lit up as he heard this. "The planet of Plantera? Why, many of my plants here are from that world. Truly a unique world in its own right, with all of its wildlife." Gaiman smiled. Yes sir," the captain responded, stumbling over his words slightly and pausing. Gaiman's smile turned into a frown and he glared daggers at the other Shade, gesturing for him to quickly continue. The Shade captain quickly continued. The situation was as follows. 2 Lord-class wizards, Gavin and Patricia, have discovered a vampire within the city of Fort Sutner. However, upon closer examination, the readings appear to have come from the wife of a relatively new hero arising from the populace, a powerful Shade swordmaster. The Shade captain wiped a sheen of sweat off his forehead as he continued. The Shade, a Lord-class warrior by the name of Inigo Montoya, showed incredible skill and is on a heroic journey to heal his wife. He paused for a moment as he frowned slightly and continued. She apparently suffered from serious injuries to the soul. His mission involves him traveling to the demon race's ruins on Moria to vanquish the demons there and take their treasures, to help find a cure for his wife. Gaiman looked intensely at the Shade captain. He folded his hands together, his face scrunched up as he contemplated what the captain said. To vanquish the demons? Didn't they already get vanquished once? How many times can you even vanquish a race? That seems like it would give pretty bad diminishing returns. Young folk these days. He shook his head sadly, as if disappointed in the youth of today. "A question, I have." Gaiman spoke authoritatively, as if his words had immense importance. "Yes, Excelsior." The captain bowed as he replied, his body shivering. To be able to help one of the legendary Holy Excelsiors, what captain wouldn't jump at this opportunity? "One of the wizards you mentioned as part of that group, you said his name was Gavin?" The Holy Excelsior continued, his eyes flashing. "Yes sir." The captain banged on his chest, a fire in his eyes. "Interesting." Gaiman looked down at his hands, a frown appearing on his face. A quiet pause ensued. The captain looked at the Excelsior expectantly. The pause stretched on for roughly 15 minutes. At that point, confusion, worry, and unease filled the captain's eyes as he could no longer contain himself. He spoke up. "Excelsior, do you know that wizard? Is he a threat? Do I need to alert the bishops? Perhaps one of the Axios teams are within the headquarters presently." The Shade captain spoke with fervor, his entire body shivering. Gaiman looked up. No, it's fine." He shook his head and sighed. "The problem is much worse than that. They cannot solve it." He rested his face in his hands, a tone of defeat entering his voice. Tears appeared in the captain's eyes. Alongside that, fierce determination and horror. He made a promise then that he would die to defeat whatever vile evil this wizard was, even if it could send one of the holy Excelsiors of the Church into despair. "What is it, Excelsior? Speak of it and I shall resolve it, with my life at stake." To be young again." Gaiman looked up, smiling sadly as he shook his head again. "The problem is not resolvable, young captain, but I admire your courage." He patted the captain on the shoulder warmly as he continued. "My name and this young wizard's. Gavin and Gaiman, they are too similar. What if someone mistakes his misdeeds or achievements instead of my glorious own? My reputation could be at stake. What if he is a nefarious robber of bakeries? Do you think I want to be known as the bread bandit? Not that I ever was known as that before, mind, but if I had been." The Shade Excelsior hung his head in his hands again. The captain blinked. The tears dried off his face as the horror and determination faded. He stared at the Excelsior incredulously as his heartbeat returned to a normal rate, his violent emotions fading. He then held his hands out to the side as if to say, "Why are you the way that you are?" But this young shade hero that has arisen, though, now this sounds quite interesting. The Excelsior stood bravely up from his despair, his shoulders hunched slightly as if he was now carrying a great burden but bearing it with supreme grace. Or that he was getting up there in age. You are dismissed. Gaiman breezed past the stunned captain, vanishing as he leapt up into the air. Powerful gusts of wind whipped around him, each gust containing a faint sparkle of light as he floated upward in the sky. Soon he was over 1,000 meters in the air, looking down on the grassy area where his large, 1-mile-wide garden was located. In the distance, he could see the towering castle city that made up the headquarters of the Church of Light. A large lake lay several miles off to the side of the relatively small, but daunting, city, a favorite haunt of the currently absent high priest. The high priest did say he was looking for a new angel. Someone to capture the hearts of the common people, to resonate not only with shades but with members of the other races as well. The holy Excelsior rubbed his hands together. Going on an epic journey to save your badly injured wife, a journey where you are destined to slay evil beings and conquer their ruined lands. The Excelsior smiled. That sounds interesting indeed, interesting enough. As he spoke aloud, he made a decision. His body blurred, moving so quickly it was as if he literally teleported, headed in the direction of the headquarters of the Church of Light. Leaving behind stray gusts of wind, moving chaotically in patterns and directions that not even the high priest himself would be able to determine. Everyone, it's him. It's him. The great hero Lord Inigo has arrived. Out of the way. I must see him. We must cheer for his epic journey. Quick, to the front. Hurried conversation was drowned out by cheers and yells of adoration as Dorian was carried into the city on a covered palanquin, wearing a luxurious golden vest and gem-studded silver pants. Laying down on the palanquin next to him, wearing an expensive-looking blue gown, was Helena. The sides of the palanquin were covered, allowing her to rest free from prying eyes. It also freed her up to allow her to glare at Dorian, as she was currently, in mouth. This is all your fault. Dorian looked back at her and then shrugged helplessly. How could he have known it would turn out like this? After he reached the edge of Plantera, Dorian had joined a high-speed caravan that was traveling across the World Bridge. His progress had been surprisingly quick to him, with the World Bridge being one of the shorter ones. In a single day, he and Helena had crossed over it and onto the normal world of Gabel. Even more fortunately, their next destination was located on a world bridge right next to the one they'd arrived on. Dorian had spent the next few hours traveling towards it with another transport group, and eventually crossed onto it. A night had passed and soon he had fully skipped past Gabel and arrived on the normal world of Marlin. They were making incredibly fast progress under the cover of him traveling as a hero to heal his wife. However, upon arrival on the normal world of Marlin, as the transport company he had used arrived in a large city known as Tycho, he had been greeted by a huge gathering. The city lord of Tycho himself had, for some reason, sent out a huge procession to greet him. They were gifted luxurious clothes and carried forward on a large, glowing palanquin. There was even a full-time choir in the background singing him praises. Musical note. Praise the great hero Lord Inigo. Musical note. Musical note. He has come to vanquish the demons. Musical note. Musical note. Evil will always fall before him. Musical note. Musical note. For on his path, he shall succeed. Musical note. Dorian listened to the choir and looked out at the roaring crowd. He could see peasant boys screaming their hearts out while maids and maidens swooned at the sight of him. Wizards and warriors alike roared aloud their support, gesturing at him. The warriors of the city lord forced a way through the crowd as Dorian was led towards the inner city area, carried forth like a king. Musical note. Praise the great hero Lord Inigo. Musical note. This is starting to get out of hand, he muttered, faking a smile and a friendly wave as he welcomed his new, adoring fans. Chapter 157 The Mighty. Hallow looked over a carefully laid out map of the Eastern worlds, his hands tracing over different portions of it. His eyes were calm and peaceful, not betraying the irritation he felt. He was sitting in a different inn this time, in a plain wooden room bereft of decoration. A large wooden table was the only piece of furniture in the area, the map he was reading spread out upon it. Damn it, the target wasn't on Tabadel or Phasfa. Both planets have been swept clean. We're currently still sweeping through Obstra, Gilton, Plantera, Tria, and Mostel, but these will take longer. He rubbed his chin as he thought it over. The last 5 planets were all rather unique in their makeup despite being normal worlds and would require more time and effort to scan. Where in the 30,000 worlds could they be? He thought, frustrated. There were only so many places that had remnants of demonic power. As he was mulling this over, however, his thoughts were interrupted as someone came up next to the room. Ruler Hallow. The background report on Lord Inigo has come in, as has some other abnormal information concerning him. A black-robed shade entered the doorway of the room smoothly, holding several sheets of paper. Hallow glanced up at him and motioned for the shade to come in. Abnormal information? Continue, he responded, eyeing his subordinate. The Church of Light seems to be showing special interest in Lord Inigo. Orders from high up in the church have caused his tale to be spread among the common people within the past 24 hours, informing all of his journey and the tribulations he will face. The shade continued. He has been painted as an epic figure, a hero of old. As a result, the common people have embraced his tale, spreading it far and wide at an incredibly fast rate. Few truly powerful figures have taken much note, but among the common folk or those that rule the common folk, he has become a bit of a myth. Hallow blinked. I suppose his story does have a certain draw to it, something that would resonate with the lower folk. How odd. He shrugged and motioned for his subordinate to continue. As for his background, the black-robed shade paused and then shook his head. We could figure out essentially nothing. What? Hallow's eyes widened as he looked at the man incredulously. Nothing at all? The Demonic Council's intelligence capabilities when it came to finding out about something or someone within the Shade Commune, the Vampire Noble's territory, and a large portion of the Boral Autarky were second to none. For them to come up with essentially nothing. It truly was as if this swordmaster came out of nowhere. Hallow's eyes flashed as he considered this abnormality. Perhaps he had been too hasty in dismissing the swordmaster. The only intel we have is that he defeated Lord Gabito of Fort Sutner in a duel. There was a minor note that he stopped a local dispute between a group of shades outside the city, but apart from that, no other information. The subordinate shook his head. There is nothing else we could discover on our own. We did find out that the Church of Light has launched their own initiative to discover his background, but with magic instead of agents. The method they used was quite unique, a light spell tied in with the Church's Hado Truth-Seeing Bell artifact to determine whether his actions would fall on the side of good or evil. And his results? Hallow asked, glancing back down at the map. He came up as neither good nor evil, but neutral, like most wizards and martial artists typically do, and hence they okayed their plan to spread his tale. The shade finished, shrugging slightly. Hallow's eyes flashed as he heard this. A strong frown appeared on his face, taking in the information and running it through his mind. He came up neutral? Hallow rubbed his chin slowly. The Church of Light's Hado Truth-Seeing Bell worked on a base level, panning fate. Someone who went above and beyond in doing good deeds would be labeled good by the artifact. Someone that was an average being, not doing much of anything evil or good, would come up neutral. And lastly, someone that did evil acts, like wanton murder or assault, or any of a variety of vile crimes often, would be labeled evil. There was an exception, however. One that made Hallow clench his fists in anger before he regained control of his emotions. The laws that one studied could affect the reading. If one studied any of the laws the maker of the artifact deemed good and righteous, the artifact would label them good. The maker of the artifact, from so long ago, didn't actually pick out individual laws for this, but rather left it up to fate and the artifact genie to filter. Conversely, if one studied any of the demonic laws, then no matter how much good they did, they would always be labeled evil, without exception. It is unfair and blatant discrimination. That damned artifact cost my little brother his life, and he was as innocent as any other shade. Simply studying the wrong law in their eyes. Hallow's eyes were cold as the memory came up, his face twitching behind the mask he wore. The reason he'd gained his current level of strength was precisely because he wanted to avenge his little brother. The artifact was created back in the time when the demon race existed at full force and constantly waged war on the other races. Its original, intended use was to ferret out traitors and spies of the demon race. The times have changed. The law one studies does not make a man. It is what you choose to do with that law that decides that. Hallow shook the thought from his head, however. It wasn't the time to focus on that. Perhaps one day his dream of destroying the Hado truth-seeing Bell and allowing shades like himself to exist freely in the commune would come true. That day was not today. If this swordmaster had come up neutral, then he couldn't be studying one of the demonic laws. But if he did study a demonic law, it would make much more sense. Actually, this entire situation makes little sense even if he is the target. Hallow's thoughts grew muddled. Why in the world would he want to draw so much attention to himself if he was the target? They have staked quite a bit on this declaration. Did the Church of Light send anyone to investigate the swordmaster personally? Hallow turned back to his subordinate, raising a question. No, we have detected no movements from the headquarters. It's possible they dispatched an agent in the field. The Shade shook his head as he replied. Almost as an afternote, he added, of course, if the High Priest or one of the Excelsiors took action, we would be unable to notice. But what are the chances of that? Hallow nodded. Everything pointed to this being a simple coincidence. After all, if he studied a demonic law, he would have to come up evil. Still, his eyes narrowed. Talth. He spoke the name of the subordinate. Report to the council and inform them I'm requesting the newest member of the council be sent to investigate Lord Inigo while I go over the remaining worlds here. He couldn't afford to leave and allow the target to escape. At the same time, however, he couldn't just let this Lord Inigo run freely, not when there was now just the slightest chance he was the target. The newest member. That would be the one that calls himself 15? Talth responded, yes. He's quite hard to track and versatile, especially now that his legs have been restored. 15 had joined the council just within the past month or two. Hallow wasn't exactly sure on the date. However, when he joined, 15 had been badly injured. He'd lost both of his legs and no matter what magic was used, they were impossible to bring back. It was almost as if they were magically sealed away somehow. He'd received word that 15's injuries had miraculously healed just as he was setting off to investigate this situation. It meant they could finally put the new member to good use. I will carry out your word immediately. Talth bowed his head and left, rushing off to fulfill Hallow's orders. As his subordinate left, Hallow's eyes abruptly widened as he realized something. It's possible he somehow found a way to outwit the artifact, hiding his demonic law. If he did that, why might he be creating a cover like this? It's not just to hide from us. No, far from it. He might be trying to infiltrate the Church of Light. Hallow's eyes widened farther, this time full of shock. He's carefully crafted a persona to draw in the attention of the leaders of the church, going as far as to claim to be a legendary warrior intent on vanquishing the demon race. After all, the demons are long since vanquished. Hallow's mind raced ahead of him. If this all is true, then his every step has been meticulously calculated. He's been outwitting the smartest generals and greatest tacticians, using their own intelligence against them. The sheer audacity, the sheer skill. He must be thinking a dozen steps ahead of everyone else. Heavens above, Hallow's eyes shook with amazement. But why? Why infiltrate the Church of Light? What is he trying to gain from them? Hallow rubbed his chin. He felt as if he had stumbled upon a huge conspiracy of enormous proportions. He shook his head. I can't understand it. It might be that this is just all some coincidence. I'll have to let 15 investigate and base my actions upon that. For now, I'll just concentrate on picking apart these 5 remaining worlds. Hallow nodded sharply. After all, what are the chances that he is some type of super genius? Behold, I am the greatest super genius in the 30,000 worlds. Tinkling laughter filled the air as Helena giggled despite herself, glaring at Dorian. Stop it, this is serious. Her voice croaked quietly as she spoke, still weak and unwell. Shish, I'm sorry. Just rest, silly. Dorian was currently grandstanding upon a luxurious golden chair. Around him, an expensive-looking bedroom spread out, with gleaming curtains, a richly decorated wall, and a fine, woolen rug on the ground. A large, golden bed could be seen at the end of the room, covered in large and fluffy pillows. Helena was laying in the center of the bed, resting comfortably under the sheets. Dorian walked over and patted her on the head. Listen to your husband, honey. I will murder you. Dorian couldn't keep a straight face and burst out laughing as he looked at the angry Helena. Of late, he'd found it incredibly fun to tease her. It wouldn't be often he could get away with that, not when she was as insanely strong and powerful a warrior as she was. All right, He held his hands up after a few moments, trying to appease her. How did they even know we were coming? Helena quietly sputtered from the side, still glaring at Dorian. Dorian held his hands out to the side, clueless. He had done everything he could to spread a reputation about himself to make their travels easier, but even he couldn't believe what had happened. When they'd arrived in the city, they'd been treated like kings and queens. A huge procession had led them inward where they met the city lord, a nice chap named Patron that was at the middle of lord class. After talking briefly, they were given free rooms to stay in the city lord's rather large mansion. Dorian had ended up accepting, especially when he heard that the city lord had helped set up transport across planet to the next world bridge they needed to cross. Is it a trap? He thought, but then shook his head. Even the public was joining in. Everyone seemed to be cheering them on and wanting them to succeed. Perhaps I am so charismatic the effect I had on people spread super quickly. He entertained the notion briefly before shaking his head again. Something was up, someone was helping him, and while he wasn't sure who, he also wasn't complaining. He intended to take full advantage of this. I don't know hell. Dorian cut himself off as he looked down at the vampire. She had fallen asleep once more, her body turning pale. I really need to get her some proper soul medicine. Regular pills no longer had any effect on her. The only thing that could help would be to get her some high-tier medicine. He watched her sleep quietly for a few minutes. Her withered appearance was just as beautiful, to him, as her normal one. He could see her fine features, her warm heart, and everything he admired about her. This is kinda creepy. Right, I probably shouldn't just watch you sleep. After a moment, he came to his senses and stepped away, shaking his head with a smile. He walked over back to the chair he'd been standing on, sitting in it. Status. Dorian. Soul status. Soul stage. Lord class. Pseudo-king. Health. Perfect. Energy. 165,221 170,229. My soul is constantly growing stronger thanks to all the laws it's attuned to. That, combined with the perfect body ability I got from Ukeli and the abilities and forms I've gained on my own. I'm at least equal to a very powerful middle king class. If I use my balanced demon form, I should be able to match late king class, right? He mused, contemplating. I should keep growing stronger. But I need to start thinking bigger. His eyes flashed. The angelic class. In the 30,000 worlds, every single class represented an accumulation. From Earth to Grand Master, it was an accumulation of raw energy and power. From Lord to King, it was an accumulation of law, as well as raw energy and power. To reach the King class, you had to fully understand a law, becoming able to use it freely and maximally. Conceptual laws often gave special abilities or powers, like the super state, that the law of pride gave leader. Some simpler laws only gave enhanced energy. From early king class all the way to late king class, the only difference was an accumulation of energy for the soul. Mastery of the law could not be increased. Once you mastered a law, you mastered it. That was it. However, beyond king class, there existed several experts that had achieved a higher class. The angelic class. From his spatial ring, Dorian pulled out two things. The first was a special list he had purchased, thanks to the help of the city lord. This list ranked the most powerful beings in the 30,000 worlds. It had first been created more than 100 years ago. The maker of this list was unknown, likely because to dare to say you could decide who among the mighty was stronger bespoke incredible confidence or incredible arrogance. The list itself was likely to be an affront to many. It was continuously updated, despite the danger. And the one Dorian was holding had been updated just last year. On this list, everyone at the very peak of existence in the 30,000 worlds. Every single one had achieved the angelic class. And of every being in existence, of all those mighty figures, there were only 8 currently known to have achieved the angelic class and still be alive. The list was known as the Recording of Might. There were actually 2 lists in it, not just one. One for the angelic class and one for the pseudo-angelic class. Angelic class ranking. 1. Arthur Tellman, the Wizard King of the Boral Autarchy. 2. Grandtherm Flameborn, Dragonfather of the Black Gold Draconic Tribe. 3. Sun Wukong, Almighty Ruler of the Grawl Alliance. 4. Saint Wanhope Gaiden, no affiliation. 5. Hasith Shanti, King of the Shade Commune. 6. Blazenthaw, one of the 3 beast generals of the Graal Alliance. 7. Cynthia Goudet, head of the Boral Autarky's Annihilation Department. 8. Homa Whistleberry, head monk of the Free School of Thunder. Dorian glanced over it, seeing several figures he'd heard of. His eyes narrowed as they landed on Sun Wukong's name, thinking of Will. He'd learned who exactly that monkey likely was thanks to Helena. He hoped the wood-turned-light wizard was doing okay. Pseudo-angelic class ranking. 1. Maximus Caesar, High Lord of the Caesar family. 2. Octavius Augustus, High Lord of the Augustus family. 3. Marcus Aurelius, High Lord of the Aurelius family. 4. Hinter Tolda, the Gold Mercenary King of the Golden Moon Mercenary Alliance. 5. Bashabah, High Priest of the Shade Commune's Church of Light. 6. Rakanjaw, one of the 3 beast generals of the Graal Alliance. 7. Saint Olga Warian, Guardian of the Blue Domain Country. 8. Blake Dracofir, the Red Mercenary King of the Golden Moon Mercenary Alliance. 9. Heptarel Ente, head of the Boral Autarky's Gravity Department. 10. Ellipsis, the pseudo-angelic class ranking went all the way till it ended on the 49th expert. In it, a few names in particular stuck out. He recognized Marcus Aurelius from Helena's vampire family, as well as a few others. 2 that resonated in his mind deeply. 24. Bruiner Gamel, the great pariah of the Golden Kingdom. 32. Archel Winston, the Holy Duke of the Elector Empire. Archel Winston of the Elector Empire? Dorian's eyes widened. The Holy Duke Archel, that is the same person that the illustrious elder mage Horhavel that saved Will asked us to bring a message to. As he thought that, he glanced over at rank 24 again. Bruiner Gamel, the great pariah of the Golden Kingdom. The Golden Kingdom, 2 pariah mages, were said to have betrayed Horhavel. They must have been part of this group. He shook his head sadly. There was nothing he could personally do about it now. He had no illusions that he was strong enough to challenge the 24th strongest pseudo-angelic figure in existence, not right now. But in the future, his eyes flashed. He owed a debt of gratitude to Horhavel. If the chance came up, he would repay it. The angelic class. What do I need to be able to fight people at that level? Or even people simply at the pseudo-angelic? The second thing he pulled out, Euclid's personal journal, didn't provide him with anything helpful. He sighed as he looked back over at the sleeping Helena. Perhaps she would know. He would ask her tomorrow. Till then, he didn't feel tired at all. As an anomaly, he could use latent growth points to refresh his mind and body, meaning he didn't need to sleep. He could just meditate instead, turning his focus to the multiple laws he studied. Rest well, Helena, he whispered quietly. He then put his full focus on meditation about the 4 separate laws he had touched upon. I will keep growing stronger. Chapter 158 Lasers. Whoosh. Dorian let out a deep breath as he awoke from his meditation, energy boiling about him. Ah. He blinked as he looked around. Their room was on the 2nd floor and set near the outer wall of the mansion, with a window letting sunlight filter in. Dorian walked up and looked outside. The light was just barely falling in from an early morning sunrise. Dorian looked out at it, taking a few more breaths. It was a refreshing, peaceful sight, something he didn't see often in his hectic, fast-paced adventure. It's very pretty. A feminine voice caught Dorian's attention as he turned around. He smiled, waving at Helena. The vampire was still resting atop the large golden bed. Her face was still pale, but there was a hint of a rosy complexion hidden within her withered appearance. The rest she'd gotten over the past few days seemed to be working. That it is, Smalls. Dorian walked over quietly, sitting on the bed next to her. How are you holding up? He gave her a warm nod. So. She raised her hand and then wobbled it from side to side. Slowly, she raised herself up, taking long, slow breaths. Her entire body moved in unison despite its current disability, the smooth warrior instincts she had trained to an incredible level still present. I'm getting better. She nodded firmly. You are, but so slowly? He mentally shook his head. The number of worlds they would need to cross to escape was far too many. He had no confidence that they could make it out of Shade territory without alerting the authorities. And once they learned Helena was a vampire, and a weakened, but especially important, one. Dorian could protect her, but all it would take is one good blast to make it past him. It wasn't worth the risk. Helena, I have a question for you. Dorian began, changing the subject. Behind him, the early morning sounds of dawn could be heard, slowly filtering in through the window. Oh, what's up? Helena responded, blinking at him. How strong are beings at the angelic class? His question went straight to the point. How strong are beings at the angelic class? Helena said the question out loud, a small smile appearing on her face. Overwhelmingly, awe-inspiringly strong. She shook her head. Those at the angelic class have taken the first step on the path to ascension. Anyone that reaches that level is so powerful they cannot be compared to lesser classes. Her voice was calm as she spoke, but Dorian could see an inner fire simmer within her as she spoke. They're that strong? Dorian said, frowning. He hadn't realized there was such a large gap. Yes, the difference between even a pseudo-angelic class being who has found their own path, and a late king class who has not, is immense. Helena continued. The man I aspire to defeat, Arthur Tellman, is quite possibly the most powerful being in existence, and also an angelic class human. I say that my goal is to grow strong enough to beat him, but to get that much power. Helena shook her head again, this time clenching her fists underneath her sheets. Hey, it's okay. Don't worry about him right now. Growing strong is a process that takes time. You'll get there. I have faith in you. Dorian said, patting her on the head. Helena was so caught up in the talk of her goals that she didn't notice. Why do you hate him so much, anyway? He queried. Tellman cut off the path to ascension from the man I love like a father. It's extremely difficult to take the final step into the angelic class, and to even stand a chance, one needs to have a very powerful soul. Helena continued. To take the final step, however, and ascend to the heavens, one needs to have a perfectly complete soul. Her voice turned bitter. High Lord Marcus used to be the most powerful of the three vampire High Lords. However, after a battle between the High Lords and Tellman many years ago, he fell to become the weakest of the three due to injuries to the soul. His wounds were further exacerbated by a duel he had with the Shade King afterwards. She frowned as she went on. The Shade King went on to break through to the angelic class while High Lord Marcus has remained trapped at the pseudo-angelic class, unable to proceed. Even if he does, with the permanent injuries he has sustained upon his soul, he will forever be unable to ascend. A single tear dripped down Helena's face as she finished, her heartfelt emotion visible. Dorian's heart went out for her. He rubbed her shoulder comfortingly, not quite sure how to respond. Well, I understand a bit more now. I'm sorry that happened to him. Helena shrugged, shaking her head. It's old news now. There is no point speaking of it. A quiet pause ensued. After a few seconds, Dorian's curiosity overwhelmed him and he continued his questions. You mentioned that a pseudo-angelic class being is one who has opened their own path. Could you explain a little more? Helena nodded and then began giving Dorian a small lesson. Yes, few people know what the angelic class truly entails. Only the elites and experts that have powerful masters are even aware. She gestured as she spoke. Reaching the king class requires complete mastery of a law. Dorian nodded as he listened to her speak. Helena continued. The amount of energy and size of one's soul is generally used to separate classes. The same applies to king class. However, there is a point for every being where it slowly becomes impossible to progress. One's soul cannot grow indefinitely, after all. Every being has a limit. The stronger your soul is before you reach king class, typically the higher your limit. Growing one's soul requires meditation on a law that you are studying. One's soul will unconsciously absorb energy from the laws of the universes, growing stronger. This basically only happens with real, sincere meditation. Meditation that will also increase your understanding of whatever law. The moment you fully understand a law, you will break through to king class. Some experts will choose incredibly abstruse laws to study in order to maximize the time they spend in Lord class to raise their limit. Others will stop meditating once they feel they are about to break through and search for rare natural treasures or pills to increase the strength of their soul, to maximize their limit. Most people, however, simply meditate and grow in strength naturally. Breaking through to the king class is already extremely difficult on its own, and for most beings, the increase in power would be marginal when using extra methods. Helena took a deep breath as she finished one part of her explanation before diving into the next. The angelic class is qualitatively different. To break into the angelic class, one needs to find their path to ascension. Find my path to ascension? Dorian repeated back, confused. Yes, every person is different. Their experiences are unique. Every aspect about them, when combined together, creates a completely unique creature that has lived a life that no one else has lived, not exactly. And all of that is imprinted upon your soul. She gestured at him. The angelic class is about taking your first step onto your own unique path to ascension. High Lord Marcus told me it requires your soul and soul spell matrix to be perfectly fused together, with no blemishes. After that has been achieved, one must enter intense meditation. One must mentally review every single experience imprinted upon their soul. It is like a rebirth of their life, living through their entire past all at once. Your soul must be fully attuned to yourself, your past, your entire life. If you have managed to achieve a state of perfect balance and cohesiveness with your soul, High Lord Marcus says you will have broken into the pseudo-angelic class. To fully break through to the angelic class, in this state of perfect balance, you only have to do a single thing. You have to willingly give up all of these experiences, these dreams and goals, your memories, everything, dissociating it from your soul. Your entire life will be wiped clean, removed from you. Of course, after all of that is removed, should you successfully let everything go without failing, the memories and emotions, all of it will come back. High Lord Marcus described it as feeling like you have stepped up to the edge of a huge cliff, one that overlooks an enormous desert with a tiny oasis in the center. If you manage to jump off that cliff successfully and land in the oasis, you can break through to the angelic class. If you land in the desert, however, you die. As Helena finished speaking, a look of exhaustion appeared on her face. She settled back down into the bed delicately. Hey there, go easy. Don't stress yourself. That solved most of my questions, thank you. He rubbed her arm, looking at her with concern. He went over her words in his head, absorbing the knowledge. The angelic class seemed like it was something quite incredible. I'll go have breakfast sent up to us. You just keep focusing on recovery. Dorian stood up, turning towards the door. Before he could leave, however, he felt Helena tug at his shirt. He stopped, turning to look back at her questioningly. Helena's tired eyes looked back, an odd light in them. Hey, Dorian? She said, her voice quiet. Yes? What's up? Do you need something else? He nodded sharply, trying to appear confident. She shook her head and then blurted out. Thanks. Huh? For what? Dorian tilted his head slightly. If anything, he was the one that should be thanking her for the info. For this all, just thanks. I won't forget it. She nodded her head at him as if satisfied with her words. Then, before he could respond, she closed her eyes and fell back down, ignoring him as she focused on internal meditation and healing. Dorian stared at her in consternation and then smiled, shaking his head. You're welcome, Smalls. Don't yaw worry about it. I got your back, he muttered as he began to walk towards the entrance of the room. Unbeknownst to him, a small smile appeared on Helena's face as he walked away. Dorian managed to get food for Helena and him. Helena could eat normally, thankfully, but her weakness remained as her body continued to try and recover. The city lord of Tycho, Patron, was an elderly shade that was quite enamored with Dorian's tale. Dorian reminded the shade warrior of himself in his youth. After eating with Helena, Dorian spent about an hour talking to the city lord downstairs, asking the shade about his history to glean more information about the commune. He also spent that time dodging questions about his own history as well, or making up tall tales when he was forced to. Eventually, he learned more about the arrangements Patron had helped set up in advance to get Dorian across planet. On the normal world that they were on, there weren't many large-scale travel companies. This normal world was a decidedly normal one, with little draw for powerful wizards. As a result, if one wanted to travel very long distances quickly, they would need to request one of the large, difficult-to-use flying ship artifacts be transported over to the city proper. Patron had arranged for that ahead of time. A flying ship was already making its way over and would arrive in the city tomorrow. All Dorian needed to do was wait another day. By using a flying ship to cross the planet, he could shave several days, or even weeks, off his travel time. With Helena in her current state, he didn't dare to try flying her across using any of his flying forms. As a side note of talking to the city lord, he learned another tidbit of information. One that was decidedly dour. An entire draconic tribe has fallen. Patron had been just as shocked as Dorian as he spread the news. One of the 12 draconic tribes had been slaughtered, down to the last dragon. Even further, some type of war seemed to have broken out deep within the tribes, according to sources spreading this gossip. This had happened several days or even weeks ago. Information traveled fast in the 30,000 worlds thanks to magic, but even then, in such a massive universe, it could only move so quickly. Especially for Lord-class experts like Patron, who simply ran a large city on a little-known normal world. The rumors say it could be anything, but I'm willing to bet it was one of the flock. I've only ever faced 3 dragons. The rhyming 11th born, and Aiden and Mira. Despite my current strength, I think that, at best, I could match up with Aiden. I might even still lose to him, even with my balanced demon form. Dorian frowned. Aiden might be at the middle of king class, but he was also a huge, powerful golden flame dragon, utilizing the law of majesty. In raw might, he would easily be able to equal late king class wizards. Further, there were bound to be other dragons of similar strength within the tribe. Now, after all of that, it was night time on the normal world. He was sitting several miles outside the city, his legs crossed as he sat down in meditation thinking things over. He had just left the city lord's mansion, using his sun eagle form to fly over here in a flash. Around him, an empty gully and a few random trees could be seen. The nearby ground was rather abandoned, non-arable and useless to most. I've grown stronger, but I can't let myself stagnate. My progress with laws will grow steadily. What I need to think about are other ways I can grow stronger. Dorian's thoughts were muddled as he thought this over, frowning. I can't just keep depending on Euclid's mystic martial arts. Eventually, I'll face a member of the flock that can use them just like me. Only, they will have the complete memories for them and probably use them with more skill. He nodded. But then, what do I have? He paused for a moment, his mind racing ahead. The 3 biggest things that separate me from others are my abilities, my forms, and my memories from Earth. Dorian came up with 3 main things. Whoosh! His body transformed from his current shade physique, gaining a set of metallic and crystalline armor, covered from head to toe, with glowing blue eyes. His balanced demon form. His voice in this form was deep and calming. He relished the feeling of the form. When he was using it, he felt as if everything was easier to sense. The world around him was clearer, as was his mind and soul. This form is perfect for practice. He realized, pleased, his balanced demon form would allow him to try anything he wanted with no downsides to his physique, making handling anything balanced and relatively easy. Now let's see. Of my abilities, for attacking, the strongest one I have is undoubtedly my Hyperion Beam, especially when I infuse Dragonfire and the power of law into it. He nodded. Recently, my soul has grown at a very fast rate. I've gained so much energy that putting out a Hyperion Beam no longer draws too much from me, but is still a very powerful attack. As he mulled this over, an idea swept over him. You know, what if I look at it like a video game from Earth? On Earth, there were some games that let you spam multiple powers or abilities at once. Dorian's eyes lit up. In this form, I should be able to practice handling multiple abilities. Even in my normal forms, I've used multiple abilities at once before. What if I use the same ability multiple times, all at once? Dorian's eyes flashed as he turned to look over at a few of the random trees that were set near him. He slowly raised the right hand of his balanced demon form, looking out at a trio of peaceful oaks. He blinked. A second later, without hesitation, he mentally yelled out, Hyperion Beam, activate, Hyperion Beam, activate, Hyperion Beam, activate, WHOOSH. Chapter 159 Violent Encounter. Dorian felt his soul spell matrix shiver slightly, deep within his soul. He had used multiple abilities at once before, but never used the same ability more than once. It simply hadn't occurred to him. WHOOSH. 3 black orbs formed directly in the air. Each one was reminiscent of his normal Hyperion Beam. As they spawned in, they rapidly began to absorb energy from the environment, becoming stronger and stronger. The air around them distorted ever so slightly as they drew upon the world around them. Whoa! Dorian felt a huge strain settle in on his soul as he simultaneously activated the 3 Hyperion Beams. It was much harder than activating separate abilities at once. It felt like he was trying to control and balance three separate beasts that were all running off in different directions, only able to pull and tug at them using a leash. It was overwhelmingly destabilizing and threatened to cause severe injury to his soul, the opposing forces each vying for supremacy. However, as the pain threatened to break his soul, a cool, refreshing feeling settled in and replaced it, forcibly making the wild energy come to balance. One of the passive abilities his balance demon form inherently possessed. The Soul of Balance ability. Soul of Balance. The Soul of Balance ability allows the user to balance any energy type of energy or power that affects the user's soul and soul spell matrix. By balancing harmful or chaotic energies, these sources of power will come fully under the control of the user. This ability can only affect energy that is directly present within the soul, or directly contacting the soul, of the user. This ability forced the competing energy to calm down. The energy still put a huge strain on Dorian's soul, making it difficult to maintain. But it no longer threatened to rip him apart, becoming much more manageable. Fire! Dorian mentally commanded, his eyes watering as he looked at the three towering oak trees. Despite the extremely helpful effects from the Soul of Balance ability, he was still in a tremendous amount of pain. The feeling of being stretched and torn apart, even when greatly mitigated, was indescribable. Whoosh! The three beams of energy shot forward. Dorian didn't try to invest any law energy or dragonfire in them, simply trying to keep them aimed straight. Boom! Boom! SWISSSH. Two explosions and a swishing noise echoed forth. Two of the Hyperion beams had landed exactly where Dorian wanted, slamming into and detonating large holes in the towering oak trees. The third beam attack, however, had missed by about a meter, shooting off into the distance where it eventually dug a long gouge in the empty, abandoned earth and exploded, forming a small crater. "Ha!" Dorian muttered as he saw this. Bits of wood and dirt rained down, falling into the two craters where the large oaks had stood. The third oak tree stood between the two others, just barely left untouched by the impact. I managed to control the attacks, but all the fluctuating energy made it difficult to aim perfectly, even with the energy in my soul forcibly balanced. He thought over what had happened, examining everything. The pain in his soul had faded to an afterthought now that he was no longer trying to control three separate Hyperion beams. Status: Dorian. Soul status: Soul stage. Lord class: Pseudo King. Health: Perfect. Energy: 164,123 170,581. I only used up a bit more than 5,000 points of energy. He thought, pleased. The stronger his soul got, the more and more affordable it became to use powerful techniques. Even simultaneously, it appeared, the damage from 1 or 3 Hyperion beams might not be too great for super powerful experts. He continued, rubbing his chin. But what about 10? What about 50? His eyes flashed as he imagined spawning 50 separate boiling black orbs of energy, infusing each one with the power of law and dragonfire. A veritable towering wave of death, dozens of lasers blasting forward all at once. An attack of that scale. I doubt even I would be able to withstand it, even when using my balance demon form plus the mystic armored body ability. He realized, feeling excitement run flush in his mind. This is it exactly, a sort of super attack combo. He clenched his fists, his eyes filling with determination. But first, I need to be able to control that many Hyperion beams. In fact, I need to be able to control at least just 3 first. One step at a time. Dorian calmed himself down, returning back to his current task. He paused for a moment, taking a look up at the sky. It was still night time. The chaotic space up above the sky was calm and peaceful, very faint light gleaming off of it. He looked back down, staring at his clenched fists. One step at a time. He repeated. He took a few deep breaths. Back to practice. Time? I want more time. Dorian mused out loud as he looked around the badly devastated gully. Dozens of large craters could be seen, as if this area had been bombarded by a swarm of small meteors, crashing hard into the earth. Several hours had passed since he started his practice. Dorian. Soul status: Soul stage. Lord class: Pseudo King. Health: Perfect. Energy: 94,123 170,600 seconds. In that time, Dorian had practiced his techniques a number of times. He took several opportunities to pause and meditate, furthering his understanding and feeling of the energy twitching within his soul. After so many hours, he had managed to get the hang of controlling up to 3 Hyperion beams. He could just barely manage to aim the 3 attacks. He had found that his first attempt had actually been a lucky one. At first, even landing a single Hyperion beam and controlling it to go where he wanted it proved a trial. Eventually, he was able to get all 3 Hyperion beams to move in the same general direction, clustered up. Now, he could control it with more precision. He couldn't use it for pinpoint attacks, but if he had a general target that wasn't too far and was a couple meters large, he could definitely hit it with at least one of his 3 Hyperion beams. It's not bad, but it's still not good enough. Why is this so hard to do? If the original Solar Rock Lizard race that possessed the same ability could have heard Dorian complain, learning that he was whining about being able to control 3 Hyperion beams at once, the entire species might have rolled on the floor simultaneously in shock. Controlling a single ability was already something that took a certain degree of focus. Controlling 2 separate ones at once was quite difficult. Controlling 3 abilities that all overlapped with each other simultaneously and commanding them to move in slightly different directions, this was a feat so excessively difficult that it was practically unheard of before Dorian. It was all thanks to his own imagination and determination, as well as his balanced demon form allowing him to even stand a chance. If I command fate to follow me, I probably could land all 3 lasers at once. Dorian surmised, nodding his head. Still, if he could become more skilled at it, he would be able to do the same without wasting energy on twisting fate. If only I could fly at full speed in my Sun Eagle form and not have to carefully transport Helena. We could save a huge amount of time and allow me to focus on getting stronger while clearing out the ruins. He sighed and shook his head. Life never makes it easy. I'll just have to handle it with the hand I've been dealt. Hyperion beam, activate 3 times. Whoosh, 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 boom. 3 separate beams formed and shot out, moving in unison. These black beams all swarmed forward and then exploded at the same time, spread out roughly 10 to 15 meters from each other. Dorian looked around at the destruction that had taken place. He nodded slightly. It was still an improvement. He could now successfully cast 3 Hyperion beams at once in his balanced demon form, even if he couldn't quite perfectly aim them yet. The 3 separate craters had appeared near each other, smoke and dust still rising from them. It was still dark out, though Dorian could just barely detect a hint of sunlight, a new day beginning to shine forth. The very faint light washed across the man in gray that was standing just behind those newly formed craters, landing on the tree he had missed in the beginning. Sorry, old trees. You guys didn't really deserve to get blown up. Dorian smiled sheepishly at the original remnants of the obliterated oaks off to his side, his first targets. Probus would be proud, he thought with a smile. Helena had told him quite a bit about that odd vampire swordmaster. Trajan would probably be not so proud. He let out a small laugh at the thought of the environmental vampire. He hoped the duo was doing well, for Helena's sake. As he smiled, for some reason, Dorian felt his soul seem to shiver. A faint feeling of unease swept across him. He looked around the now mostly decimated clearing. He could still see the empty gully and the few remaining trees standing proud. There were even a few bushes he hadn't noticed clinging to some of the trees or spaced out intermittently. Walking towards him between the most recent craters was the man in gray, moving calmly. There's nothing here. How odd. He frowned, turning around to look behind him. Perhaps it was his imagination. Focus, Dorian. You can't stop your practice yet. Let's get a few more. He abruptly cut himself off. Shiver. Dorian felt his soul twinge with a familiar feeling. One that reached out and touched him at his very core. A feeling that vanished immediately, disappearing as if it had never been. A feeling he only got when one of his fellow anomalies was present. Instinctively, almost without thinking, Dorian raised his right arm in a guard position, directly in front of where his heart was. Shhink. Boom. Dorian felt a rippling pain in his arm as something slammed into the mystic energy protecting him and the durable physique of his balanced demon form, and pierced halfway through it. An explosion of energy blasted Dorian backwards a moment later, causing him to tumble through the air. Midway through, he regained control, however, twisting his body around to land on the ground. Green blood dripped out of the wound on his right hand as his eyes widened, fierce concentration causing them to almost glow. Eyes that zeroed in on a figure that was standing right in front of him with a surprised look on his face. A nondescript figure of a man dressed in gray, wielding a dull black knife. A figure that, even as he pinpointed its location, seemed to fade out of awareness, trying to escape his sight. Scanning, unconsciously, Dorian ordered Orsa to scan the figure as he struggled to keep his eyes on it. No life forms detected, Osra coolly replied. What? It's standing right there. Dorian's eyes widened as he glared at the gray figure. He blinked. Whoosh! The figure was no longer visible. Dorian spun around, looking to the left and right. What the hell? He muttered, clutching at his right arm. Dirt fell from the air as the impact from the blow settled. Dorian could see a small crater formed in the ground where he had been standing. A few trees had been knocked over, cascading leaves and branches into the air. The man dressed in gray was slowly walking towards Dorian again, through the falling dirt. The dirt seemed to fall normally despite the man in gray's presence, not coating him or affected by him. What is happening? Where is he? What? Dorian sputtered as he looked around clueless. I am being attacked. By something. Dorian struggled to remember the appearance of the being that had attacked him. He even started to doubt such a figure existed at all, but the blood leaking out of his arm proved that thought wrong. It's going to attack me again. I can't see it or sense it. Or can I? I sensed a fellow anomaly. Hold on. I have my Jade memory ability that gives me a perfect memory. It's impossible for me to forget anything. As Dorian realized all of this, his heart dropped. Whatever is attacking me is making it impossible for me to remember it, as well as impossible to detect it. It must be some type of ability or law that is incredibly powerful. I can't afford to try and fly away or flee. I have no idea where it's attacking from and might expose myself further. Dorian's mind worked incredibly quickly, processing the information and reaching a conclusion in an instant. His eyes darted to the left and right. All he saw was the mostly destroyed gully, a few trees lying on their sides, the last remnants of dirt falling from the air, and the man in gray walking towards him with a knife. No sign of any attacker. Think, Dorian, think. His heart pounded in his ears as he tried to find a plan of action. I command fate, show me where the attacker is. He put his full focus into this order, commanding reality to change. Nothing happened. What, even that has done nothing? Dorian's eyes widened in horror. A sense of impending doom seemed to settle upon his shoulders. What do I do? The man in gray walked ever closer, raising the dull knife once more. The man was merely a couple of meters away. Dorian's eyes flashed as a separate idea came to mind, one fueled by desperation. Black flames, activate, activate again, activate a third time, surround my body. The man in gray lunged forward, the knife plunging towards Dorian's chest. Whoosh! Before the blade could land, a torrent of black dragonfire swarmed across Dorian's body. A huge, massive amount of concentrated flames, abnormally centered around him. Why won't you just die? I rushed all the way here, just for you. The man in gray let out a pain-filled yell as he lunged backwards, several large black-colored patches of flame latching onto his body. His body slammed into the ground, twitching as the man focused on putting out the deadly fire. The man abruptly came fully into Dorian's awareness as the fire seemed to shed whatever mystical cover was protecting him from his eyesight. Got you. Dorian glared at the figure. The strain of controlling so much dragonfire slammed into his soul simultaneously, making him wince in agony. He hadn't practiced using the black flames so much, or simultaneously, but his experience using multiple Hyperion beams made it just possible to pull off. Immediately, as he looked at the gray figure, the sensation of seeing another anomaly crashed into his soul. It returned with a vengeance, throbbing and impossible to miss. Scan him, Osra. Scanning. Species. Gray Manter. Class. King Class, Middle. Maximum Energy Level. 1,019,771. I've got you now, bastard. Dorian swore as he zeroed in on the figure. He flicked his wrist. Blood pounded in his ears as he went all out, not holding back and waiting for the figure to vanish again. Hyperion Beam, activate, 3 times. Go. Chapter 160 Komba. 3 black orbs of energy rocketed into existence, floating right above Dorian's right arm. At the same time, Dorian focused his mind not only on controlling the charging orbs, but also on manipulating the power of law. His law of valor strengthened his physique while his law of greed helped ease the burden his soul faced when manipulating so much energy. The burden placed on his balanced demon form was greatly eased. The insight he would gain from practice like this would normally be little, but in real combat, Dorian didn't care a whit about that. Wrath, mercy, imbue into the orbs. Dorian opted to not imbue Dragonfire into the Hyperion beams. Doing so many things at once was already stretching the limits of his concentration. His balanced demon was just barely able to handle it. At the same time that he was charging these attacks, the injuries he'd suffered to his arm began to passively heal at a slow rate. The passive body of balance ability that his balanced demon form possessed spread out the damage he took, meaning it would take quite a bit to heavily injure him. However, the attack that the gray figure had launched was one that left remnants of some corrosive law, one that tried to melt through his flesh. It was painful, even with everything he had fighting against it. Oh ho ho ho, are you going to throw something at me? I can sense the energy gathering in those orbs. The man in gray spoke, his voice cool and relaxed as he finished batting out the black flames that had landed on his body. However, he didn't vanish this time and remained fully in Dorian's sight. He looked very close to that of a nondescript, normal human. He had 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, short hair, and was wearing a plain set of gray clothes. Everything about him seemed normal, forgettable, nothing special whatsoever, but he isn't a human. He is a gray manter. Dorian kept his eyes on the anomaly as he handled his abilities and laws with skill. Osra, what is a gray manter? Gray manters are an extinct type of humanoid creature, distinctly related to the Shadwar and ancestral vampires of old. The Grey Manter bloodline is very powerful, a natural lord class being that has an innate connection to the law of corruption. Osra's voice echoed coolly in Dorian's head. Partially due to that, Grey Manter young will find it extremely hard to survive, killed by their own blood while at a young age. Only when raised carefully and protectively, or if born a supreme genius, could a Grey Manter survive to adulthood. She continued. They possess a unique ability known as absolute fade. No other being in existence holds this ability. This ability allows the Grey Manter to fade away from reality completely, escaping from fate itself. This fading comes with a price, however. While faded, a Grey Manter's view of time and reality is distorted. Using one's senses, either physically or with one's soul, to sense one's surroundings while faded is impossible. While it is possible to move, it is essentially impossible to recognize where one is moving in respect to the 30,000 worlds. Grey Manters would typically reveal themselves for a brief moment as they mark their target with something they can sense innately, using that to track and attack while faded. Her voice echoed with finality as Osra finished speaking. Reveal themselves to track me. Dorian's eyes widened. That must be why he could sense the Grey Manter for a split second. In fact, he hadn't even physically detected the Grey Manter at all. It was only the innate connection he had with all anomalies that clued him into its presence. It also must be why he couldn't affect the Grey Manter by using his will to twist fate. It seemed fate itself was unable to detect the presence of the Grey Manter. A quite unique ability that would be well suited to avoiding fate wizards, though movement while faded sounded like it could be difficult. What do you want? Why are you attacking me? Dorian said out loud angrily, glaring at the Grey Manter. A valorous aura burst around him as he drew upon the law of valor, reinforcing his defense. We're both anomalies, what reason is there for us to fight? He tried to reason with it. Ha ha ha, you make a good point. I don't have any personal vendetta against you. The other anomaly began, nodding his head. He spoke in a lazy, relaxed manner. Yes, isn't his point good? After all, I was only asked to investigate. The anomaly seemed to be talking to himself instead of to Dorian, as if he was carrying on a full conversation. My name is 15 and I am ranked 15th among our kind, brother. What number are you? All of a sudden, the anomaly seemed to zero in on Dorian, its lackadaisical nature seeming to vanish. A dark aura seemed to swarm around him, one that felt both dangerous and corrupt. As Dorian looked at the anomaly named 15, he realized that the being was presenting a very real threat. In terms of energy, Dorian was tired from several hours of continuous practice. While he hadn't expended all of his strength, he had just over half of his energy remaining. He needed to present an outwardly confident visage. HMPH. Numbers are meaningless. Power is the only thing that matters. Dorian's voice was gruff as he glared at 15, his eyes cool. Ha ha ha, oh, you aren't wrong. Who cares about our numbers? We are all members of the flock, right? I suppose I do care, given that I took the name 15. At least I didn't call myself 0 while really being born second. Valid point, valid point. 15 let out a flurry of conversation, rapid fire as he spoke, line after line back and forth. It was unsettling and incredibly odd. The anomaly clearly appeared to be mentally unstable. But 15's eyes turned focused again as he zeroed in on Dorian. Why am I attacking you? He shrugged. Because I can. Whoosh. The anomaly's body blurred as it, abruptly, transformed. Its body stretched and grew giant, completely warping into that of a towering, 30-meter-tall demonic being. It was gargantuan, covered in huge muscles and green scales. The air around it pulsed with a demonic aura, giving it a terrifying appearance. It also seemed oddly familiar to Dorian, the aura it gave off reminding him of his lesser throne demon form. Asra, what is it now? He sputtered, in the split second before the anomaly attacked. It has transformed into a greater throne demon, a lord-class demonic bloodline with an innate connection to the law of life. It does not appear to be utilizing that connection, however. I'm a fan of the demonic ruinsss. 15 launched itself forward with a loud yell and charge, eschewing hiding to attack directly. Whoosh, boom, boom, boom. In the instant that it moved, Dorian launched the 3 Hyperion beams he had been charging. Immediately, the 3 lasers of black energy, imbued with the power of law, shot towards the huge towering target. 3 explosions rang out as the Hyperion beams landed. All 3 missed. What? At the moment that he fired the shots, Dorian was immediately aware that they wouldn't land. The attacks were powerful, and Dorian's practice of the past several hours had made him capable of firing them in a general direction. But as he shot them off, Dorian felt all 3 seemed to coincidentally fire in a manner slightly off, a contrivance of fate. Damn it, it's an anomaly like me, its soul is twisting fate, either intentionally or not. He swore as he realized this. He would need to be perfectly on target to make the attacks land. Thud. The anomaly touched down right in front of Dorian, slamming one of its enormous fists right at his head. Fine, let's play this way. Dorian thought, his eyes cold as he saw the attack mounting down on him. Perfect body, activate. Black scaled rage dragon, transform. BOM. A massive explosion shook the air as the greater throne demon slammed its right fist into the chest of a towering, black scaled rage dragon. The valorous aura that covered the dragon shook with electrical energy, combining with the mystic armored body ability to shield it from the impact. The energy from the law of corruption that the anomaly wielded was unable to penetrate Dorian's defenses. However, the force of the attack, as a whole, threatened to blast Dorian away. The sheer strength of the anomaly was extraordinary, especially in its current form. It was very clear that it was physically stronger than him, even with his perfect body ability, mystic armored body, passive great strength and various other abilities active. Dorian dug his back claws into the ground to force himself still. Black flames. Whoosh. That again. The greater throne demon was knocked backwards as it was covered in black fire, searing its skin. The huge, towering demon abruptly transformed again, this time becoming a small, fluttering bird that Asra defined as a sky-edge eagle. The body of the bird was only a few meters wide, allowing it to dodge the black flames that had been burning the much larger demon. Its body blurred as it flew backwards at an incredible speed, slipping through gaps in the fire. A split second later, the anomaly returned to the appearance of a gray manter. It dusted itself off, looking at Dorian with a look of appreciation. You aren't even phased at all? You're a tough one, huh? Dorian stared back at the anomaly, his black-scaled rage dragon bristling with power. Whoosh! He transformed back into his balanced demon form, his eyes cool. Behind that coolness, however, a huge layer of shock existed. How did he keep his clothes so smooth and undamaged without storing them while changing forms? I need to talk to his tailor. Dorian glared at the other anomaly, unable to make heads or tails of it. The gray clothes the anomaly wore in his gray manter form seemed to just magically appear as he transformed. When he switched into a huge form, Dorian had to store his clothes, even the magic ones that could shapeshift, or else he'd tear them. Dorian tossed the stray thought aside, however, as he focused on what the anomaly said next, while also checking his status. Dorian, Soul Status, Soul Stage. Lord Class, Pseudo King. Health. Good. Energy. 61,195 170,600 seconds. My energy is taking a hit. Dorian's eyes were cool as he took a step forward, his fists clenched. Hey, hold on a moment. 15 held up his hands, shaking his head. I think you were right, friendo. There is no point in us fighting. It's clear I won't be able to best you in direct combat, so why should we waste our time pointlessly? Dorian glanced one last time at the gray figure. The sincerity in the man's voice seemed genuine and unfeigned, if still slightly insane. It was also true that Dorian appeared to have the upper hand. That was mostly because he was expending his energy at a fast pace that would only last a brief time, but the other anomaly didn't know that. The front Dorian was putting up was one of supreme confidence and strength, after all. Especially his perfect body and mystic armored body abilities. It made his draconic form more than strong enough to trade blows and come off apparently unscathed from the other anomaly's attack. That seemed to have left a big impression. Very well, he nodded. Many of the anomalies he had met had ended up becoming allies or at least something that he wouldn't quite consider an enemy. Despite the fact that the man in gray had tried to kill him, Dorian was willing to overlook it as a misunderstanding and let them go their separate ways. There was no reason to fight to the death over this and risk injury or anything that might make getting Helena healed more risky, even if the abilities the anomaly had were extremely interesting to Dorian. Yes, it was clearly my fault to attack you. 15 began, nodding his head sharply as he took a few steps forward. As a member of the Demonic Council, my desires got the best of me. It has been a long time since I've been able to walk and fight freely. I was betrayed a while ago, you see, by one of our own. The anomaly's voice switched in tone and pitch twice as he talked, looking at Dorian sadly. It stopped about a dozen meters in front of Dorian where it stood passively. It's talking a lot? It's not moving forward to attack, it's just talking. Dorian stared back with his arms crossed, not allowing the confusion he felt to manifest. As the anomaly rambled on, Dorian felt vaguely unsettled. He did not lower his guard. He would not be so foolish as to believe its offer of a truce, not for a being he had just met that had also just attacked him. I feel like it's going to attack me from behind. Dorian's instincts fired as he looked at the anomaly. I feel like it's distracting me so it can attack me from behind. But how? It's just standing there, Dorian thought, unable to make heads or tails of it. The unsettling feeling grew as he became more and more confident. The rambling of the anomaly had set him off, as had his own experience in the 30,000 worlds. He was no longer the new pup that was learning his way in this world. Dorian didn't wait to find out. Instead, he stamped his feet on the ground, once more unleashing black flames that covered his body. The attack spread out, covering an area roughly the size of 5 meters. In the instant that he did this, the image of the anomaly in front of him dissipated into the air. At the same time, another figure materialized, just a couple of meters away from Dorian. A second demonic-looking being covered in bright white scales with red streaked patterns on them. This figure was launching forward a fist, punching through Dorian's black flames. It has donned the form of a white illusion demon. Osra helpfully informed him. Not today. Dorian smiled a smile that failed to reach his eyes as he sidestepped the fist, his powerful reaction speed giving him an edge, and clamped down on the demonic figure's arm. You, 15 sputtered. Before he could say anything else, however, Dorian clenched down with his fist. Crunch. Dark, corrupting energy flowed over Dorian as the man screamed, slamming into Dorian's powered-up physique and mystic armored body, shearing through it. The pain was unbearable and incredibly damaging. If he held on for even a second longer, he would sustain permanent injuries. With an almost casual throw, Dorian tossed the body of the anomaly away from him, sending it soaring through the air. He played it off as if he had felt no pain, as if he wasn't the slightest bit injured from the attack. The black energy seemed to be related to the law of corruption, some sort of last-ditch self-defense mechanic in response to Dorian's attack. Thud! The body of the anomaly landed down hard, roughly 15 meters away, inside one of the craters formed by Dorian's Hyperion beam practice. 15 jumped up from the crater, cradling his right arm. You, ha ha ha, you're good, yes you are? The anomaly spat, his entire body trembling. Black blood leaked from his mangled right arm, the bones in it well and truly shattered. Dorian had imbued the law of wrath and the law of mercy into that blow, going all out. He would have been surprised if the anomaly hadn't taken a serious injury. You shouldn't let your guard down just because you are sneak attacking. Dorian's words were full of authority and power, ringing in the air. 15's aura wavered, but was still as oppressive and powerful as before. Despite his wounds, he was still a dangerous threat. He was full of energy, far more than Dorian's maximum amount currently. 15 was, after all, in the middle of king class. And to Dorian, who was nearly out of energy and hurting, going up against 15 in his current state would be suicide. He still had one last trump card. The absorption spell that was imprinted on his soul spell matrix. While he had no idea how it worked, he could tell that the spell would allow him to easily absorb anything under pseudo-angelic, in his current state. The spell and his soul wouldn't be able to handle anything stronger. But he didn't think he would need to use that. Instead, he smiled. Dorian had gone through a lot in the 30,000 worlds. In that time, he'd learned one powerful lesson. Sometimes one didn't need to be strong to win a battle. Merely having the appearance of strength was more than enough. Dorian blinked slowly. He didn't speak or reply. His body was racked with pain, the electrical energy that coated him still searing his skin. He ignored that entirely, acting as if it didn't affect him. Instead, he took a single, slow step forward. Hup! 15 threw himself backwards, jumping more than a dozen meters as he put distance between himself and Dorian. Every single action Dorian had taken in this battle gave off an impression of overwhelming power and strength. His movements, his attacks, even his speech. Everything was incredibly convincing, especially when it came to 15, one of his fellow anomalies, one who was expecting to be facing a stronger member of the flock. 15 created an image of Dorian in his mind as a monster that was absolutely ranked in the first 10 anomalies. And, technically, Dorian was the firstborn. He wasn't entirely wrong in his guess. You want to vanquish the demon race and destroy the ruins on Moria? Hypocrite. Just like you, Kelly, you are nothing more than a hypocrite, destroying that which you deem evil. 15 rapidly retreated away from Dorian, his body transforming once more into his sky-edge eagle form. His words were full of irrational anger as he continued to rage at Dorian. He also appeared to have awakened some portion of Euclid's memories in his soul, Dorian noted, his eyes flashing. It seemed he indeed wasn't alone in being an anomaly with part of Euclid's memories. I can't stand hypocrites. We will meet again at those hallowed ruins, foolish brother. You will not be able to survive then, should you dare. An army from the depths of chaos itself shall be standing to greet you. The anomaly continued its odd habit of talking to itself as it fled, its tone of rage abruptly shifting to one of self-reflection. Of course, with that said, I'm also a hypocrite. But, then again, I never liked myself in the first place. So I guess that makes sense. 15's voice rambled off. Whoosh! The anomaly's body blurred and vanished as it retreated at an extremely fast speed, leaving behind a slightly incredulous-looking Dorian. Well, that worked. Spurt. Blood spurted from Dorian's lips as he took several deep breaths, releasing the tension of the moment as he felt the anomaly truly leave. He didn't fear that the anomaly would try to sneak back and attack again, knowing the impression he left on it would buy him some time. I'm okay. He took several deep breaths, shaking off the injuries. His balanced demon body had helped tank a ton of the damage, as had his mystic armored body form. His body slowly began to regenerate, expelling any remnant energy from the law of corruption that the demon had wielded. His biggest loss was the huge amount of energy he spent, but that was only temporarily. I did it. I managed to fight it out using my own power. Further, his eyes flashed darkly as he looked in the direction the other anomaly had fled in. You got lucky to find me now, when I was still mid-practice. The experience and practice Dorian had gained from this fight and his hours of practice had sent a huge amount of insight into using multiple versions of his Hyperion beam ability at the same time, as well as using his abilities quickly in general. His mind went over these insights as he began to head back towards the city proper, the early light of dawn breaking. He had already been half exhausted when the anomaly attacked. Now, however, with all the insights he'd gained, Dorian had no doubt that he would be able to grow much more precise and skilled in using multiple Hyperion beams. "You'll wait for me on Moria, huh? With an army from the depths of chaos to greet me?" he said aloud, his eyes cold. In the 30,000 worlds, the concept of chaos was similar to the idea of hell from Earth. A place of eternal damnation where nothing good existed. "That's just fine. I'll come to greet you." He smiled as an idea popped into his head. "But why should I risk it alone? I can't put Helena's health in any sort of danger." He nodded, his grin widening. "I've got just the idea." 2 days later. "I have new information for you, Ruler Hallow. It concerns the ultimate Great Lord Inigo." "Ultimate Great Lord? What? When did he never mind. Just hand me the report." "What? He's forming an army of Lord-class wizards and mystic martial artists? It's already 100 members strong? Even 3 King-class mystic martial artists joined it, pledging their loyalty to his cause? It's already headed towards Moria to vanquish the Demon Emperor's ruins and is only 1 normal world and 1 exotic world away?"